Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my friend and I decided to grab a beer at a nearby bar. Just as we placed our order, his phone rang. It was his mother, her voice urgent. She asked him to check on his cousin Nicole at her dormitory, just a block away. Without hesitation, we canceled our order and headed straight there. As we approached the dorm, an uneasy feeling crept over me, sending a chill down my spine. The air felt heavier somehow. Since it was a ladies' dormitory, we were only allowed inside after speaking with the administrator. Stepping into the hallway, we found Nicole surrounded by her dorm mates, all gathered in a circle, praying the rosary. Nicole looked pale. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and fresh scratches covered her shoulders. Concerned, I asked what had happened. One of her dorm mates spoke up, her voice hushed but tense. The night before, Nicole had been studying alone in her room while her roommates were out partying. It was late, and the dorm was eerily silent. That's when she said it happened. 3 shadowy figures appeared. A woman in a long black dress, a monk with a sinister expression, and a headless figure dressed in a formal suit and tie. Nicole claimed the monk and the headless figure held her down while the woman in black attacked, choking and scratching her. She tried to scream, but the door, one she swore had been unlocked, wouldn't budge. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the figures vanished. At that exact moment, the door swung open, and her dorm mates rushed in, finding her gasping for breath, shaking with fear. Terrified, Nicole refused to sleep alone that night. She stayed in another dorm mate's room, where a group of them watched over her until morning. The scratches on her skin remained, but the rest of the day passed uneventfully. That evening, her roommates decided to take her to the mall, hoping to distract her from the nightmare. Just as they were leaving, Nicole realized she had forgotten her phone upstairs. She went back alone to retrieve it. Minutes passed. Then, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the 3rd floor. Her roommates sprinted up the stairs and found her in the hallway, sobbing uncontrollably. Nicole stammered through her tears, saying the same 3 figures had returned. The woman in black attacked her again while the other 2 restrained her. This time, no sound had escaped her throat, as if something had silenced her completely. The group quickly brought her back downstairs, surrounding her in prayer once more. I stood there, watching them. The air felt thick and cold. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something brushed against my left arm. It was icy. Instinctively, I turned to the window, but it was on my right. A deep unease settled in my chest. My friend decided it was best to call an ambulance. 3 days later, I checked in on Nicole. My friend told me her parents had arrived to stay with her at the hospital, but even there, she wasn't safe. At night, she screamed, saying she could see them, standing at the foot of her hospital bed. Her father, who had been resting on a nearby cot, rushed to her side. Later, he admitted that for a brief moment, he had seen them too. The black-dressed woman hovered over Nicole, while the 2 male figures loomed beside her. Eventually, Nicole was moved to an apartment to stay with relatives, hoping a change in surroundings would bring her peace. Later, I learned she wasn't the first to experience this in that dormitory. Another strange event involved Miss Rowe, a professor overseeing an exhibit in the school lobby. That Saturday, she was working with students, setting up a display when during a short break, Miss Rowe, one of the professors, handed out snacks to the students assisting with an exhibit. That's when a peculiar girl approached her, asking for a snack, though she didn't have the required stub. Something about the girl felt off. She wore an old-fashioned polka dot dress, the kind you wouldn't see anyone wear today. Her voice sounded distant, almost hollow, and her eyes, deep and lifeless, gave Miss Rowe an uneasy feeling. Trying to make conversation, she asked for the girl's name and class schedule. The girl introduced herself as Maria B. and claimed she was a classmate of the students assigned to typing room 5 from 2:30 to 4 p.m. But the students standing there immediately denied knowing her. They insisted they had never seen her before that day. Despite the odd interaction, they all continued their work, and Maria even helped pass out pamphlets. When the exhibit was done, the group left the university together. Maria walked alongside them as they crossed the street. Then, in an instant, she was gone. One moment she was there. The next, she had vanished without a trace. By Monday, Miss Bro shared the experience with her colleagues, still puzzled by what had happened. Intrigued, Miss F, another professor, decided to investigate. They checked the registrar's office, and to their surprise, there were records under Maria's name. But something wasn't right. The girl's photo in the file didn't quite match the one they had met. It was similar, but not the same. As they dug deeper, they discovered Maria had graduated in 1998. She had been a transfer student. Checking her older records from her previous school, they found another photo. This time, it was a perfect match. The records were dated 1993. Curious, they visited the address listed on her file. They found a family with the same surname, but when they asked about Maria, they were met with confusion. No one in their family had that name. No one fit her description. There was no explanation. Eventually, they reached a chilling conclusion. Maria must have been a ghost. After that encounter, no one ever saw her again. Hoping to bring her peace, the faculty held a prayer service and a mass in her honor. A few months ago, my call center company opened a new site in a large warehouse-style building. It had separate sleeping quarters for men and women, designed for employees working the graveyard shift. The men's sleeping area was spacious, with around 20 double-decker beds and a medium-sized bathroom. It was meant to be a place of rest, but for me, it became a place I never wanted to step foot in again. That night, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten much sleep during the day, and by 2 a.m., I could barely keep my eyes open. While chatting with my girlfriend online, I told her I needed a quick nap and logged off. The sleeping quarters were mostly dark, with only a faint glow from the bathroom light and the slivers of illumination peeking through the door. There were about 4 other agents already sleeping in the room. The air conditioning kept it cool, and I lay down on a lower bunk near the entrance without using a blanket, my shoes still on. But something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. My family has had countless eerie experiences, so I've never been the type to dismiss strange occurrences. That night, as I lay there, an uneasy feeling settled over me. My mind started playing tricks on me, imagining figures hiding in the dark corners or standing near the empty beds. I stayed alert, scanning the room, ready to jump up and leave if I saw anything out of place. One by one, the other agents woke up and left, until only one other person remained, sleeping across the room. Then the sound started. A faint creak from the far end of the room. Soft footsteps, as if someone was walking in high heels. The quiet clink of something small hitting the floor. My heart pounded with each noise. I looked around, but I saw nothing. Even the other agent was still fast asleep. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up suddenly, caught in a strange, semi-conscious state. My body felt heavy, my vision blurred, and a numbing cold surrounded me. Something was wrong. I couldn't move my head, but my eyes shifted to the right. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure stood beside my bed. It looked small, like a child, maybe a young boy, but completely black, like a silhouette with no features. It didn't move. It just stood there staring. I forced myself not to look directly at its face. Deep down, I knew I shouldn't. Terror mixed with anger. I didn't want to be afraid, but I was. I was vulnerable, and whatever this thing was, it knew it. Desperately, I started reciting the Lord's Prayer in my mind, over and over. Please help me. Then suddenly, the heaviness lifted. I could move again. Without thinking, I bolted upright and ran straight for the door. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Since that night, I'd never set foot in that room again. I only told my girlfriend and one colleague about the experience. To my surprise, my colleague admitted that he often heard strange noises in that room, but always brushed them off. My girlfriend was adamant. I should never sleep there again. She believed whatever was in that room didn't want me there. Even now, I don't fully understand what happened. I don't know what I saw or why I felt so unwelcome, but I know one thing. I'll never go back. At first, everything seemed normal. My girlfriend and I had just moved in, settling into what felt like a quiet, peaceful home. But soon strange things started happening. At first, we didn't mention them to each other. Maybe we were just imagining things, or maybe it was nothing. But as the days passed, the silence between us couldn't hold back the truth. One evening, I finally admitted to her that I often heard someone whistling, a light, cheerful tune, almost like an old song carried on the wind. Other times, I heard a woman's voice, soft and distant, as if she were deep in conversation with someone. To my surprise, my girlfriend didn't just believe me. She had experienced the same things. Then she told me something that sent a chill through my spine. She often saw something in the house, a shadowy figure moving quickly past doorways, just at the edge of her vision. I had seen it too. Things only got stranger when her older sister visited and stayed the night. The next morning, she casually mentioned that she could feel something in the house. She wasn't scared though. In fact, she said it was a guardian spirit, watching over us. We were stunned. We had never told her anything about what was happening. And then, things got worse. At night, we started hearing sounds from the roof, scratching, crawling, sometimes heavy thuds as if something was moving up there. At first, I told myself it must be animals, maybe stray cats or birds, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. I had heard stories of creatures that lurked in the dark, stories about the Aswan. Frustrated and angry, I refused to be afraid. Every time we heard those noises, I shouted up at the roof, cursing at whatever was there. I wasn't defenseless. I had weapons, a .38, a .45, a samurai sword, and a collection of knives. So whenever I heard the sounds, I grabbed a flashlight, stormed outside, and scanned the darkness. I even threw stones at the roof, hoping to scare it off. But no matter how many times I searched, I never found anything. Then one night my dog, a small Spitz tied near the back door, started crying uncontrollably. I knew what that meant. The thing was back. I turned off all the lights and crept toward the back door, gun in hand. The house was silent, except for the soft whimpers of my terrified dog pressing against the door. Then I heard it. Cock. The sound was strange, sharp, and distant, but I knew the legend. If it sounds far away, it's actually close. I gripped my gun tighter, heart pounding, waiting for the doorknob to turn. If it did, I was ready to fire. But then, silence. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. I scanned the windows, the door, the dark corners of the yard. Nothing moved. Eventually, the tension eased, and I returned to bed. But before I could fall asleep, the noise returned. This time, louder. The roof creaked under something heavy, followed by scratching, as if long nails dragged across the surface. I had enough. I grabbed my gun and a knife, and my girlfriend and I stepped outside. The night was still, the air thick with an eerie quiet. I told her to scatter garlic and salt around the house, on the windows, the doors, even the roof. We'd had heard that these things hated salt. And then, as suddenly as it started, the disturbances stopped. For months, the house was quiet again. But one evening, while sitting outside, enjoying the cool night air, my girlfriend suddenly pointed at the sky. I followed her gaze and saw it too. A creature was flying low, slow, deliberate. Its wings flapped heavily, and it moved in a way that didn't seem natural. It was brown, roughly the size of a dog, and no, it wasn't a bat. It wasn't an owl. It was something else. We stared at it in silence, neither of us daring to say what we were thinking. Since that night, I've kept my weapons close. They say wetting bullets with saliva, makes them more effective against creatures like these, so I've done the same with my knives, my samurai sword, keeping them sharp, just in case. Because who knows, maybe one day, I'll finally come face to face with whatever has been watching us all this time. Panic set in as I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven. No matter how hard I tried, the key wouldn't turn. Then I heard footsteps, my brother rushing down the stairs. I hesitated, peering through the window to see what would happen. The living room was empty. When my brother finally opened the door, he looked confused. "Why did you call me?" he asked. I hadn't called him. Even as I explained, he refused to believe it, but I knew what I heard. The voice calling his name. It sounded just like me. I left for work, still shaken, the feeling of unease clinging to me like a shadow. A year later, something even stranger happened. One night, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night, but this time felt different. The clock on my bedside table read 2 a.m. At the corner of my room stood a full-length mirror, reflecting the door behind me. Without thinking, I glanced at it and froze. I saw myself in the mirror, standing, staring back at me. But I wasn't standing. I was lying in bed. For a moment, my mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My reflection looked exactly like me, but its face was blank, empty of emotion. A chill ran through me. Why am I standing up while I'm still in bed? The thought flashed through my mind, absurd yet terrifying. Then I felt the mattress beneath me, the weight of my own body pressing into it. That wasn't my reflection. I squeezed my eyes shut, turned over, and forced myself to ignore it. But even now, the memory lingers, creeping into my thoughts when I least expect it. And I wasn't the only one. The last incident didn't happen to me. It happened to my youngest brother. He had always been more sensitive to things we couldn't explain. It was 2007. He woke up early, around 5 a.m., to get ready for school. As he buttoned his uniform, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror. It was smiling, but he wasn't. His chest tightened with fear. He looked closer, heart pounding. His own reflection was grinning at him, wide, unnatural. Terrified, he bolted out of the house. It didn't matter that it was too early for school. He just needed to get away. But as he locked the front door, his eyes flickered toward the window's reflection. This time, his head wasn't where it should be. It was tilted at an unnatural angle, resting on his shoulder, still grinning. He wanted to scream, but instead, he kept walking. All the way to school, he caught glimpses of it in passing shop windows. The same twisted grin, the same unsettling eyes. It never left him. Even after all these years, we still don't know what was mimicking us. It never tried to harm us, but whatever it was, it left its mark. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Between 2003 and 2006, I worked as a data encoder in one of the oldest buildings in Binondo, a well-known Chinese district in the Philippines. It was my first job, and I was excited to start. My shift was from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and every day, I'd stop by the bathroom before heading home. At first, I didn't pay much attention to the eerie stories my coworkers shared. Ghosts, strange voices, shadows in the halls. It all seemed like superstition. The bathroom itself was small and simple, tucked at the end of a short hallway. Near the entrance stood a plant, gifted by a well-known psychic Jojo Akuin. I never thought much of it, until the knocking started. One evening, after my shift, I went to freshen up. As I stood inside, washing my hands, I heard it. Knock, knock. Through the semi-transparent door, I saw a shadow. Tall, maybe around 5'9". Assuming it was our receptionist, I called out, "Wait, Ma'am Eves, I'm almost done." No answer. Then the knocking came again, louder this time. Annoyed, I snapped, "Wait for your turn." Silence. The shadow remained. When I finally opened the door, no one was there. The hallway was empty, except for the plant by the entrance. I wasn't scared, not yet. I figured whoever it was had walked away, but curiosity got the best of me. I went straight to Ma'am Eves and asked if she had been outside the bathroom. She looked at me confused. I've been at my desk the whole time. I asked the other employees. None of them had been there either. That's when it sank in. Who had knocked on the door? Later, I learned I wasn't the only one. Beeth, a senior encoder, told me she had stopped using the bathroom alone. One evening, she had gone in, only to find herself trapped inside for 30 minutes. She screamed. She banged on the door. No one heard her. Not until a coworker, noticing the lights were still on after hours, came to check. And then there was the night of the blackout. During a nationwide power outage, I had gone to the bathroom with a rechargeable lamp. Just 5 minutes, I told myself. As I brushed my teeth, the ceiling light flickered. Strange, the power was out. I ignored it, but as I reached for the door, I felt something. A faint breeze, a shift in the air. Then the light flickered again. A chill crawled up my spine. The door was shut. There was no wind, no open windows. Something was in there with me. Heart pounding. I threw open the door and ran out. Later, I asked my coworkers if anyone had been fixing the electricity. No one had. Even now, I wonder who or what had been in that room with me. I worked as a data encoder in one of the oldest buildings in Binondo, a well-known Chinese community in the Philippines. It was my first job, and I was excited to start. My shift ran from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and every day before work, I'd stop by the bathroom to freshen up. At the time, I wasn't interested in ghost stories, so I dismissed the eerie tales my office mates shared. The bathroom itself was small, just past a short hallway, with an oval mirror on the left, a sink, and a toilet facing the door. A faucet with a pail and shower sat on the right. It was cramped but functional. Near the entrance stood a plant, gifted by a well-known psychic, Jojo Akuen. I should have paid attention to the stories. One evening after my shift, I went to the bathroom as usual. As I washed my hands, I heard a knock. Through the translucent door, I saw a shadow, tall, maybe 5'9". Assuming it was our receptionist, I called out, "Wait, Ma'am Eves, I'm almost done." No reply. Then the knocking came again, louder this time. Annoyed, I snapped, "Wait for your turn." The knocking stopped, but the shadow remained. I sighed, finished up, and opened the door. No one was there. Just the plant near the hallway, its leaves perfectly still. I wasn't scared yet. I assumed whoever it was had walked away, but curiosity got the best of me, so I went straight to Ma'am Eves and asked if she had been outside the bathroom. She looked confused. "I've been at my desk the whole time," she said. I asked the other employees. None of them had gone to the bathroom. The realization sank in. Who had knocked on the door? Later, I found out I wasn't the only one. Beeth, a senior encoder, had stopped using the bathroom alone after a terrifying experience. She had been locked inside for 30 minutes, screaming for help. No one heard her. Not until a colleague, noticing the lights were still on after hours, came to check. Then came the night of the blackout. There was a nationwide power outage, and I had gone to the bathroom with a rechargeable lamp. Just 5 minutes, I told myself. As I brushed my teeth, the ceiling light flickered. Strange, the power was out. I ignored it, but as I reached for the door, I felt it. A faint breeze, a shift in the air. Then the light flickered again. A chill crawled up my spine. The door was shut. No windows were open. Something was in there with me. Heart pounding. I threw open the door and ran out. Later, I asked my coworkers if anyone had been fixing the electricity. They shook their heads. The main power was switched off. The ceiling light couldn't have flickered. Another afternoon, I stepped out of the bathroom and heard running water. I turned back. The faucet was fully open. I knew I hadn't touched it. The toilet was an auto flush, so there was no reason for the water to be running. A maintenance worker checked it and found no issues. He laughed and said, "Maybe the spirits are just playing with you." I didn't laugh. One evening, after a small office celebration, a few of us stayed late to test Beth's new phone's video function. She recorded the entire room, capturing our cubicles and even our boss's desk. When we replayed the video, we saw it. A silhouette of a person in a yellow shirt, sitting in our boss's chair. Confused, we checked the chair. Empty. We replayed the video. The figure was still there. We ran out of the room, terrified. The next day, we showed the video to our colleagues. Some tried to explain it logically, but Dana pointed out something chilling. The walls are white. The chair is red. The desk is brown. There's no way a reflection could look like a person in a yellow shirt. That ended the debate. Then came Monday morning. As we worked, we noticed the heavy office door, narrow and solid, opening and closing on its own. Impossible. It continued until we all decided to leave the room. Even our boss, when asked about the history of the building, only smiled and said, "Some things are better left unsaid." To this day, even though I no longer work there, I still wonder about the mysteries of that old building. Some experiences stay with you forever, lingering in your mind like a shadow that never quite fades. This is one of those stories. During my time at my previous company, work trips were a regular part of the job. On one assignment, I traveled with Nina, a systems analyst, and Randy, a programmer, to a cement manufacturing company. We were there for 2 weeks to set up a distribution and inventory system. The company provided accommodations at their staff house, a modest but comfortable place, similar to a 2-star hotel. The rooms were air-conditioned, the food was good, and the amenities were decent, though the building itself was a bit old. It felt more like a working vacation. The first few nights were quiet, aside from the occasional strange noises. We didn't think much of them. One evening after a long day, Nana and I headed back to the staff house while Randy stayed behind in the IT room to finish up some work. A light rain had fallen earlier, and the air was cold and misty. As we approached the building, we noticed a woman standing at a second-floor window near our rooms. Her silhouette was clear, but her face was obscured by the dim light. We assumed she was another guest, and didn't give it much thought. But when we reached the second floor, the hallway was empty. There was no sign of anyone. Later that night, as we were unwinding in front of the TV, we heard muffled voices coming from Nina's room. It sounded like someone praying or whispering in a low, rhythmic tone, but the words were impossible to make out. I hesitated, then slowly pushed her door open. The room was empty. We exchanged nervous laughter, trying to shake off the unease, and went to bed. But the next morning, Nina woke up with scratches on her legs. She had no idea how they got there. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced them, confusion in her eyes. Randy tried to reassure her, suggesting it could be an allergic reaction from the seafood we had the night before. But I could tell Nina wasn't convinced. That afternoon, I returned to her room alone to grab some documents for her. As I opened the door, something, just a blur, moved past me. It happened so fast that my breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I didn't tell Nana. I didn't want to scare her. But later, I confided in Randy. That night, things seemed normal, and Nana finally got some rest. But the following day, Randy had his own unsettling experience. While washing up in the bathroom, he felt the light push on the back of his head. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, until he caught movement in the mirror, a shadow, right outside Nina's room. We chose not to tell her. There was no point in adding to her fear. On our final night, we stayed late at the office to wrap up paperwork. Around midnight, we heard the sound of a door opening and closing. At first, we thought it was just someone else working late, but when we checked, the hallway was empty. Then, a metallic scraping noise echoed from nearby, the sound of a steel cabinet being pulled open. That was enough for us. Heart pounding, We grabbed our things and rushed back to the staff house. That night, we made sure to stay together. I slept on the floor, Randy took the couch, and Nina stayed in her room. We kept the lights on and locked every door. Around 4 a.m., I woke to the faint scent of food cooking. I sat up, disoriented. The house was silent, but the smell lingered, thick and unsettling. Nina and Randy were already awake, their eyes wide, their faces pale. The scent shifted. It was no longer food. It was something else, something faintly sweet yet suffocating, like burning candles. Then a knock echoed from Nina's door. We didn't speak. We didn't check. Without hesitation, we packed our bags and left. We spent the rest of the night at the cafeteria, waiting for the sun to rise. None of us said much. We didn't need to. The fear was written all over our faces. By 5:30 a.m., we went straight to the office, made up an excuse about an urgent matter, and got permission to leave. We never spoke about what happened. Not to our colleagues. Not to each other. Within a few years, we had all left the company. Even now, the memory lingers, as vivid as the night it happened. Some things are never meant to be understood, only remembered. I am 22 now, studying medicine in Iloilo City, but the memory of my Lolo and those experiences will always stay with me. Cebu City isn't known for ghost stories like other parts of the Philippines, but my parents' house has always been different. The house was built in the late 1940s after a fire destroyed the original structure and much of the neighborhood. It's a two-story home made of concrete and timber, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. The basement, cold and damp, was rarely used, just a place to store old furniture and forgotten things. My mom wasn't a hoarder, but she believed in keeping things that might be useful someday. Growing up, my younger brother often talked about strange things happening in the house. I never took him seriously. I thought he had an overactive imagination, until I experienced them myself. When I was 18, I worked late shifts at a fast food chain. I usually got home around 1 a.m., made a quick snack, and watched TV before bed. One night, as I was fixing something to eat, I heard movement in the basement. It sounded like something shifting, furniture scraping against the floor. That was odd. We rarely touched anything down there. Everything had been stacked neatly for years. Curious, I turned on the basement light and stepped inside. Silence. Nothing had moved. The unease lingered, but I brushed it off. This started happening more often. Some nights, I'd hear the sound of glass bottles smashing, but when I checked, nothing was broken. Years later, after I graduated and my mother passed away, I moved back to the house to keep my dad company. I worked as a night supervisor at a hotel, often coming home exhausted. Sometimes, I'd fall asleep on the couch in the living room instead of going upstairs. One night, a strange sound woke me. It was rhythmic, soft, like a tennis ball bouncing on the wooden floor upstairs. I hesitated, then slowly climbed the stairs to check. There was no ball, just a few baseballs my brother had left behind. Shrugging it off, I went to bed. Then the footsteps started. Light, quick, like a child running down the hallway. I checked every room. Nothing. When I mentioned it to my brother, he barely reacted. "Oh, that's the child ghost," he said casually. He explained that a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, had been in the house for years. I had only heard him, but my brother? He had seen him. One night, while dozing on the couch, I felt something tap my shoulder. It was gentle, just enough to wake me. Thinking it was my dad, I looked around. No one was there. Maybe I imagined it. Then it happened again, and again. The taps were real. Too real to ignore. That night, I left and stayed with my sister. Even relatives felt something strange in that house. One Christmas, my cousin stayed in my room. The next morning, he came running downstairs, eyes wide with fear. The TV turned on by itself, he said. He swore he had seen the screen flicker to life, even though no one had touched the remote. The house has always been full of memories, some warm, some strange. But even now, when I think back on all the things that happened there, I can't help but wonder, was it ever really just our family living in that house? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. My cousin once had a terrifying experience in our house. One Christmas, he stayed in my room. The next morning, he bolted downstairs, pale and shaken. The TV turned on by itself, he said. He had switched it off, but it powered back on. Confused, he unplugged it completely. Then it turned on again. That was it. He refused to stay in the room alone after that. Another time, my dad installed a doorbell to help with his hearing. It worked fine at first, but then it started buzzing at exactly 2 a.m. every night. Thinking it was a prank, we disconnected the button. The buzzing continued. We removed the button entirely. It still didn't stop. It only ended when I dismantled the buzzer completely. Strange things like this kept happening, but none were as chilling as the phone call earlier this year. My family stayed there from March 28 to 31 for Holy Week. Since I work at night, I'm usually awake long after everyone else is asleep. Instead of disturbing my sister by turning on the lights in our room, I read books in the living room. My mom preferred sleeping on the veranda, saying it was cool and comfortable at night. She had a habit of waking up occasionally to check if the water in the bathroom was running. Water supply there could be unreliable. For the first 2 nights, nothing strange happened. She'd wake up as usual, ask if I had checked the water, chat for a bit, then go back to sleep. On the 3rd night, things changed. I woke up at 1:42 a.m., checked my iPod, then grabbed my book. Before settling in the living room, I went to the master bedroom's bathroom. Inside, my 2 uncles and my younger brother were sleeping on the bed. There was even space for another person. I brushed my teeth, then went back to the living room. 2 hours passed. Then my mom woke up and came inside from the veranda. She was wearing the same clothes as the night before. She looked at me. I looked at her. I waited for her usual question about the water. She said nothing. Without a word, she walked to the bathroom. I heard water pouring into a basin. A few minutes later, I needed to pee, so I went to the bathroom and knocked on the door. My mom opened it immediately and walked out silent. While I was inside, I heard footsteps near the bed. I figured she had gone to the master bedroom to rest. When I came back to the living room, I waited for her to return to the veranda so we could talk. She never did. At 5 a.m., I decided to wake her up so we could go to my grandparents' house for breakfast, as we had been doing every morning. I went to the veranda first. My aunt was sleeping there. Not my mom. Confused, I checked the master bedroom. My mom was sleeping beside my younger brother. I nudged her awake, and we left for breakfast. Later that morning, around noon, we were lying on the bed, me finishing my book, her busy with something. Somehow, the topic came up. She told me she had gone to bed early the night before, around 7 p.m. She said my uncles had moved to the master bedroom because they felt uncomfortable sleeping in the living room. One of them even claimed he felt like someone was watching him. Then my mom said something that made my blood run cold. She had not slept on the veranda at all that night. She had been in the master bedroom since evening. She also pointed out that she had been wearing a different set of clothes. I was 100% sure I had seen her come inside from the veranda at 3 a.m. I was 100% sure she had been wearing the same clothes from the night before. Yet she denied it completely. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. I lived with my dad in the house I grew up in. It was built in the 1940s, and while I hesitate to call it haunted, the word lingers in my mind. My brother has always been sensitive to these things. He has experienced them since he was a child. I didn't start noticing them until I was 18 or 19. Neither did my sisters. It seems my brother is more attuned to the paranormal than the rest of us. After college, I moved away to join the military, but after my mother passed away, I returned home to keep my dad company. For the first week, everything was normal. Then one afternoon, after a job interview, I came home and heard my dad talking in his room. His voice was loud, almost like an argument. I couldn't make out the words. Assuming someone was with him, maybe my brother or a cousin, I settled in the living room and turned on the TV. Moments later, the front door opened. My dad walked in, alone. I froze. The realization hit me like a shock. Who had he been talking to? There was no way my dad could have left his bedroom, gone out the window, and entered through the front door. Our house had only one entrance, and the backyard was accessible only by walking around the house. Yet there he was, walking in, looking at me like nothing had happened. Dad saw the look on my face and frowned. "What's wrong?" I told him I'd heard him talking, loudly, in his bedroom just moments before. But my dad had been visiting a friend in the hospital. We checked his room. It was empty. The window was locked from the inside. Whoever, or whatever, had been in his room, it wasn't my dad. Another room in the house always gave me chills. It used to be my sister's, but sometimes I slept there because it had air conditioning. The problem was the dresser, the one with a large mirror at the foot of the bed. I hated that mirror. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Every time I slept there, I woke up to a faint but clear voice calling a name. Susan. None of us knew a Susan. The voice had no clear source, no direction, but it was loud enough to hear. It never said anything else, just that name. My sister swore she never heard it, but last Christmas, a cousin stayed over and had the same experience. I haven't slept in that room for years. The night before I left for boot camp, something happened that still unsettles me. I was in the backyard with my cousins and friends, having a small gathering. I don't drink much, but I enjoy the company. By 11 p.m., everyone had gone home, except for one cousin who was too drunk to drive. As I started cleaning up, my dad came outside to help. Then we both heard it. A voice. "You should not have done that." I thought it was my dad, but when I turned to him, he looked just as confused. Then we heard it again, coming from the basement window. Same words, same tone. We checked. The basement was completely dark. The door was still padlocked. The voice was distinctly male, and it shook us both. A few weekends ago, my girlfriend visited and brought us dinner. While my dad and I sat in the living room, she set the table in the kitchen. A few minutes later, she called us in. I stopped when I saw the table. She had set it for 6. There were only 3 of us. Confused, I asked why. She frowned. "I heard children laughing and running up and down the stairs," she said. "I thought your sister's kids were here, but my dad and I hadn't heard a thing." I grew up in that house, the only place I ever truly called home. But my parents sold it 5 years ago. Back then, I didn't understand why. Now, I think about it often, especially the strange, unexplainable things that happened there. The house was built when I was just 3 months old, in an old subdivision in Iloilo City. Neighbors said our lot was one of the scariest in the area. It told stories of falling stars landing there before the house was built. Not stars, they said, spirits. And what struck me was how consistent these stories were, like the entire community had agreed on them. When I was a child, I shared a room with my nanny. Our room was in the middle of the house with my parents' room on one side and my sister's on the other. Only a thin divider separated my parents' room from ours. If I had nightmares, I would wake up crying and run to my parents' bed, sleeping on the side near the wall. It was the only way I felt safe. When I became a teenager, the house underwent major renovations. My parents' old room became mine. The garage was converted into their new bedroom. The backyard was expanded with 2 new ways to access it, one through the garage, the other through the dining room. One day, I was heading outside through the dining room. As I walked, I passed my nanny going in the opposite direction. I said something casual to her and kept walking. When I reached the backyard, she was already there, talking with the maids. I ran back inside, scaring everyone. They thought something had happened. I just laughed it off, saying I was playing a prank. Years later, I learned about doppelgangers. That house seemed to reflect my emotions. Once, when I had a fever that lasted nearly a week, the entire household became hostile. My parents argued. My sister fought with the maids. Even my nanny was upset for no reason. She later told me that whenever I was sad, she would hear angry voices in the house. Once, she even saw someone lying in the maid's bed when no one was there. After we moved, the master bedroom in the old house stayed empty most of the time. My parents only visited on weekends. One day, while everyone was at the dining table, I went inside to grab some unused items. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt a strong tug from the other side. Not the usual resistance of an old door. It was deliberate, like someone was pulling it open. Everyone at the table saw me pause. They stared at me, startled. I just laughed. Guess someone in there doesn't want me closing the door yet. No one laughed with me. One of the strangest things happened when my sister and I both got sick at the same time. Fevers that wouldn't break. Days passed. Then a week. And every night, I dreamed of shadows moving in the house. Whispers. Footsteps pacing in the hallway. My nanny said the house felt wrong. That week, everyone in the house had bad dreams. No one said anything, but the silence between us was heavy, like we all knew something was watching. Some houses never let go, and I don't think that one ever did. Even now, I wonder, did we leave it behind, or did it leave with us? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 4, my family, my mom, dad, little sister, almost 3, and I moved into a beautiful 2-story house in a suburb of Las Vegas, Nevada. It was a huge improvement from our previous small home and the cockroach-infested apartment we had lived in before that. Excited about the move, my parents invited friends over, including a priest my dad had known for years. According to my mom, the priest immediately asked my dad to step outside to talk. He urged him to leave the house, claiming something evil was there. My dad, not being religious or spiritual, laughed it off. 14 years later, I wish he had listened. At first, everything seemed normal, at least to my sister and me, but as my mom later revealed, strange things had started happening early on. My parents heard what sounded like large wings flapping in their bedroom at night, though nothing was ever there when they turned on the light. They eventually stuffed towels into the fireplace, thinking something might be getting in. But the sounds persisted. Their exercise equipment would also turn on by itself, even when unplugged, and occasionally the TV in their bedroom switched on for no reason. The most unsettling event happened one night when my mom woke up to see the glowing outline of a figure at the end of their bed. Paralyzed with fear, she glanced at my dad, who was also awake and staring at it. After a few seconds, he jumped up and turned on the light. The figure was gone. My parents never told us about these experiences while we were kids, but even without knowing, we feared their bedroom. It always felt cold and unwelcoming, and I dreaded looking into their bathroom mirror, imagining I'd see a terrifying woman emerging from their walk-in closet. It wasn't long before my sister and I started having our own experiences. One day, when she was about 4 and I was 6, she was alone in her bedroom when all the toy musical ints in the playroom started playing at once. She called out, asking if it was me, but I was downstairs watching TV. Years later, She told me she had been too scared to check the playroom and had joined me downstairs instead. When I was around 8, I was watching a ghost hunting show in the playroom. The screen went black for a moment between scenes, and in the reflection, I saw the figure of a tall man standing in the doorway. Thinking it was my dad, I turned around, but no one was there. Terrified, I turned off the TV and ran downstairs to be with my family. Every night, my sister and I would hear footsteps in the attic or on the stairs. I also often imagined a wild-haired woman with sharp teeth grabbing me and throwing me down the stairs as I walked down. Years later, I realized these were more than just childhood fears. Things escalated after I received my first Holy Communion in 3rd grade. One night, I woke up at exactly midnight. The red light on my smoke detector, which usually stayed green, was blinking. Sitting up to look, I saw her. A woman in a pale blue nightgown stood at my doorway. Her white hair was piled wildly on her head, and her face shifted between a skull and a blank, featureless visage. She swayed, leaving a trail of light as she moved. My young mind tried to rationalize it, so I called out, "Mommy?" She shook her head. "Sissy?" Again, she shook her head. Finally, I asked, "Grammy?" She smiled at me, a grin so chilling I hid under my blanket, pinching myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The next morning, I told my mom, who tried to comfort me, saying it was probably my grandmother. But years later, my sister revealed that Grammy had visited her too, looking just as she had in life, radiating love. Whatever I saw was not my grandmother. By 5th grade, we had the house cleansed for the first time. Things were calm for a while, but they started up again. Shadows darted from one room to another, cabinets opened and slammed shut, and strange occurrences continued. My sister had her own experiences, including seeing a disembodied head with wild red hair and sharp teeth. What alarmed me was that it matched the woman I used to imagine on the stairs, though I'd never told anyone about her. In 9th grade, my parents separated. My father's absence, while sad, brought peace to the house. We had it blessed again, and for a time, everything seemed normal, but the footsteps returned, and my dogs refused to enter my room. I often heard noises from my mom's room when no one was home. Nothing serious happened after that, and we moved out in 2011. Since then, things have been quieter, though I often feel a heavy presence around me. A close friend of mine who claims to be psychic believes a dark spirit was attached to our family. When I laughed nervously at her suggestion, she warned me not to mock it. She said the spirit could cause harm, even mentioning that it might make my mother miscarry. Not even 2 weeks later, my mom lost her baby, and doctors couldn't explain why. Both my friend and my mom say I have a light that attracts spirits, and it might be connected to the spiritual sensitivity that runs in my family. While I've tried to move on from these experiences, they remain a part of me, and I'm left wondering if this gift or curse has a purpose I'm yet to understand. My name is Lauren, and I'd like to start with some background. The house I live in now used to belong to my grandparents. They're still alive and now live just down the road. When I used to visit this house as a child, I never had any paranormal experiences. However, since moving here with my mom in the summer of 2004, I've had intense encounters with the paranormal. Our house has a finished basement, which we tend to avoid as much as possible. This isn't easy because the house is split level and all our laundry is done downstairs. The railings from the upper level open right into the basement, so it's impossible to avoid entirely. Whenever I go down there, I feel an overwhelming sense of dread. My hair stands on end, and I get the feeling that something might hurt me. One week, the feeling was so strong that neither my mom nor I could bring ourselves to walk all the way down the stairs. We saged the house, which helped for about a week, but the feeling soon returned. One day, I had my friend Katie over, and we were putting groceries away in the pantry. Afterward, we went upstairs to the living room to chat. Suddenly, We heard loud crashing noises from the basement. When we went back down, everything we had put away was lined up in a perfect circle in the center of the pantry. Another time, while I was in the jacuzzi tub in the basement, I saw a black shadow walk through the bathroom just an inch away from me. On a different occasion, I was in the pantry when I heard a deep male voice say hello directly in my left ear. It didn't scare me, but I wasn't sure how to respond. Sometimes, when we bring up items from the basement that belong to my great-grandparents, I notice shadows walking from my room to my mom's room, which are directly across the hall from each other. Multiple guests who've stayed at our house have reported seeing a tall man in the hallway. They've described him standing in my doorway, tipping his hat at them. When we first moved in, there was a music box on a baker's rack filled with depression glass. One day, the music box started playing by itself, and the rocking chair nearby began to sway slowly. At that moment, I felt an intense wave of sadness and started crying uncontrollably. One specific night, I was hosting a small party with about 10 of my closest friends. I had an EMF detector set up in the hallway, and while we were in the kitchen, it suddenly went off. We ran to the hallway and began taking photos with our phones. In one of the pictures, there was a very clear white apparition. Not long after that, I was lying in bed, about to fall asleep, when I saw the bathroom light at the end of the hall turn on by itself. My mom was snoring in her room, so I knew no one had physically turned it on. The scariest experience happened recently after I had ACL reconstructive surgery. My boyfriend had been sleeping on the couch in the living room with me to help take care of me. One night he wasn't able to stay, and I was dozing off alone when I heard heavy breathing above my head. Then, I felt my hand being lifted into the air as if someone were trying to hold it. I screamed and sat straight up, terrified. Paranormal experiences aren't new to me. I've encountered spirits in every house I've lived in. When staying at my dad's houses, I've often seen or heard strange things. Once, I stayed at a friend's house and had a dream about a man lying in a coffin in the living room. When I told my friend about it the next morning, she revealed that the previous owner had killed his family and himself in that room, and there were still bloodstains under the carpet. I am the first owner of my home, built in 2006 after Hurricane Katrina destroyed my previous residence. The land had never been developed before, just untouched woods. This August marks 7 years in my house, but for 6 of those years, I've experienced ongoing paranormal activity. The first year was peaceful and quiet, but as time went on, the activity increased. I should mention that I've had unexplained experiences in every home I've lived in, and my childhood was filled with negative paranormal encounters that have shaped my perspective. The activity began in my master bedroom and gradually spread to other parts of the house. In the bedroom, I've heard my name called and once saw a shadow pass by the window, blocking out the light momentarily. I also saw an electric blue orb, somewhere between the size of a baseball and a softball. When it noticed me watching, it darted into the wall of my closet and hasn't reappeared. Sometimes while lying in bed, I felt something sit on the edge of the mattress and even saw the indentation as if someone was there. In the kitchen, I've seen objects move on their own. One day, I watched a glass slide 2 inches across the counter. Later that same day, as I closed the refrigerator door, I heard knocking on the freezer door right in front of me. I stood still watching and told it to stop. It did. In the living room, I've heard voices. Once, after returning from work, I distinctly heard someone say, "She's back." It made me realize there might be more than one entity in the house. I've also heard unexplained popping noises in the middle of the room, but nothing in the electrical system explained them. The hallway has become a source of frequent disturbances. I often hear heavy footsteps as if someone wearing boots is walking with purpose. The sounds always stop at the doorway of whatever room I'm in, and I get the distinct feeling of being watched. My cat notices it too and will stare in the direction of the sounds. Despite looking, I only ever see empty space. 2 weeks ago, I heard the footsteps again while I was in the guest room. This time, they stopped at the doorway and I heard my name. Nervously, I asked, "Who's there?" I wasn't expecting a reply. There never had been one before, but this time a male voice answered me. I didn't recognize the voice or feel any connection to it. The reply scared me so much. I couldn't bring myself to ask any more questions. Although the activity frightens me, I don't believe the presence is intentionally trying to scare me. I've never been touched, pushed, or harmed. The only truly negative experience happened in my office during the second year of activity. The forceful, breathy voice scrawled, "Get out," directly into my ear. I was so terrified I left the house, but as I drove away, I got angry at myself for letting it push me out. I turned the car around, went back into the office and yelled at whatever it was, letting it know I wouldn't tolerate being treated that way. Since then, I haven't experienced anything like that again. I know how all this sounds, but I've come to accept that I'm not imagining it. Something is happening in my home. I even reached out to a psychic medium for help, but unfortunately, I was told I couldn't be helped. I don't know why. This journey has been unsettling, but I've learned to coexist with whatever is here. While I don't understand it, I've decided not to let it control my life. This is my home, and I won't be driven out. My name is Luke, and I'm a Christian. I start with that because I believe the event I'm about to share happened because of my faith. If you don't agree, that's okay. This is my story. I was 20 years old when I received Jesus Christ as my Savior. As an independent Baptist, I hold strong beliefs about angels and devils or demons, though I use the term devils as the King James Bible does. I believe in their existence and that devils are drawn to symbols of the occult. Shortly after I was saved, I began researching the occult. My intent was to understand it better so I could help those caught in its grip. This research led me to read non-canon texts like the Shepherd of Hermas, the Book of Enoch, and others. Along the way, I stumbled upon figures like Aleister Crowley and Helena Blavatsky. If I could go back, I'd avoid learning about them altogether. Mentioning their names even now feels unsettling, as if it draws something unwanted closer. Despite my curiosity, I always prayed for protection, and God provided it. Still, I knew from Scripture that God sometimes allows His people to be tested, even tormented. The Apostle Paul himself was buffeted by a messenger of Satan to keep him humble. A Christian cannot be possessed or destroyed by devils, but we can certainly be harassed. One particular night stands out in my memory. It was a warm evening, typical for Australia, even in winter. I went to bed with only a thin sheet and left my door open for airflow. I wasn't afraid of the dark and preferred the quiet. As I began to drift off, I felt an unnatural coldness envelop my room. The chill was so intense it kept me pinned to my bed, too uneasy to walk into the dark hallway for more blankets. I tried to push the feeling aside and fall asleep. I woke up to the sound of a mug being placed on the kitchen counter. It was a familiar noise, something my mother often did before bed, but a glance at my glowing watch showed it was 1:15 a.m., far too late for her to be up. The house had been dark when I fell asleep. Why were the kitchen lights now on? A moment later, I heard the mug again, followed by the light clicking off. The iciness in my room seemed even colder now. The house fell silent. No hum of the fridge, no crickets outside, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was in the room with me. My heart raced as I lay frozen under my sheet, sensing its approach. Then came the whisper. "Luke," my eyes shot open. What I saw was both beautiful and horrifying. A girl with long black hair and pale white skin stood floating in front of me. She had no arms or legs, just a flowing dress like a christening gown. Her lips moved, but the voice was guttural, deep, and unmistakably male. "Luke, power. You can have it. I will prove to you that I am powerful. Wake up." I jolted awake, gasping for air. Relief washed over me. Just a dream, I thought. But then I noticed the kitchen light was still on, and the whisper returned. "Watch." Fear paralyzed me as I closed my eyes, bracing for something terrible. Nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, I decided to turn off the kitchen light. The moment I stood, the light flicked off on its own. Simultaneously, the oven timer, smoke alarms, and my bedside alarm all blared at once. I scrambled for the light switch, but none of the lights in the house worked. Panicked, I ran into the kitchen, its dim green glow from the oven timer flashing ominously. I checked the fridge for light. Nothing. None of the switches worked. Desperate, I rushed outside to the main switchboard. My father, an electrician, had taught me how it worked. Opening the cover, I saw every safety switch had been tripped to the off position. That shouldn't happen unless there's a severe fault. And yet, inexplicably, the kitchen timer and smoke alarms were still running, despite there being no power to the house and no battery backup for the timer. With trembling hands, I reset the switches. As the last one clicked on, the alarms stopped. The house was silent again, but I knew what had happened. A devil had offered me physical power. Tangible, immediate, contrasted against the victory over sin and death that Christ offers. That night, I prayed like I never had before, seeking protection from whatever had tried to tempt me. In 1988, my second wife and I moved into a house I had purchased from my brother and his wife. The house carried a dark history. My sister-in-law's first husband had tragically ended his life in the master bedroom. Unable to stay there, they had rented it out for years before selling it to me when they moved out of state. At first, everything seemed fine, but over time, the problems began. It started with my wife seeing the figure of a man standing in our bedroom late at night. She couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to believe it. Then, objects around the house started moving. We place something on the living room table, leave for a few minutes, and come back to find it on another surface, or even on the floor. These small disturbances were unnerving, but not terrifying. That changed one evening. We were sitting in the living room watching TV when suddenly, the television in the basement turned on at full volume. Startled, I ran downstairs, thinking someone might have broken in. But when I got there, the basement was empty. I turned off the TV and thoroughly checked every corner. No sign of anyone. The incident repeated itself several times. Frustrated, I unplugged the TV, hoping that would end it. But minutes later, it turned on again, blaring as loudly as before, even though it wasn't connected to power. This time, I moved the TV to the middle of the basement and unplugged it once more. My wife was terrified. She believed the ghost might harm us and begged me to sell the house and leave. Instead, I suggested calling my parents, who were ministers, to perform an exorcism on the house. They agreed to help and came over immediately. They prayed in every room, blessing each one with holy water, including the garage. After that, the disturbances stopped. We lived in peace for 6 more years, until everything unraveled again. Out of nowhere, my wife began seeing horrifying visions of black demons. She said they were calling her to the dark side. One night, she confessed she was thinking of taking her life. Alarmed, I rushed her to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with paranoia, manic depression, and delusions. She was placed under suicide watch overnight and prescribed medication. For a time, things improved. She seemed happier, calmer, and more like herself. But then, without telling me, she stopped taking her medications. She believed she was cured. It wasn't long before her behavior changed drastically. She became unpredictable, flying into fits of rage over trivial things. One evening, she got angry because I hadn't taken a box to the basement fast enough. As I walked toward the front gate, she hurled a mug of iced tea at me. It missed my head by inches, shattering against the iron gatepost. A few days later, during another argument in the kitchen, she threw a cast iron skillet at me. I managed to duck, but it smashed through the sheetrock wall behind me. 2 days later, she yelled at me to take something to the basement, as I was already walking down the stairs. Before I could react, she kicked me from behind, sending me tumbling down the steps. I hit the wall hard at the bottom. Though I wasn't seriously injured, that moment became my breaking point. I told her I couldn't stay unless she resumed her medication. She responded by screaming at me in a deep, guttural voice that didn't sound human. That's when it hit me. The entity we thought we had exorcised might never have left. I believe it had taken hold of her. She refused any help, including an exorcism. Our relationship deteriorated, and eventually, we divorced. About a year later, I heard she tried to harm her new boyfriend by pushing him out of a moving car. She now lives alone, refusing help from anyone. I suspect the entity is still in that house, or perhaps still within her, but I don't know for sure. She won't speak to me, so I have no way of finding out. This wasn't how I envisioned our life together, but whatever had attached itself to her refused to let go, and she refused to let anyone help. When I was 17, I opened a door that should have remained closed. It started innocently enough. I was at the public library and checked out a book about demons. To me, it was just another horror book, something to read for a couple of at the time. I didn't have much understanding of demons. I believed in God, but the darker side of things felt abstract, almost fictional. I thought angels protected us, and that nothing truly bad could happen. That belief would change forever. I read the book, and almost immediately, things began to shift. I started seeing shadows, dark, ominous shapes that seemed to have a presence of their own. Some resembled crows, others black cats, and then there were the smaller humanoid figures. But one shadow stood out. It was taller, more human-like, yet unmistakably otherworldly. It was always there, leaning over my shoulder as if it were reading with me, or perched on the roof, peering into my window like a crouching bat. Its silhouette, pointed ears and all, blocked out the stars as it watched me. I wasn't the only one seeing these things. My sister began noticing them too. Together, we witnessed flashes of blue and white lightning streaking across darkened rooms, as if an unseen battle was raging before us. Once, while at the movies, the entire theater became a battleground of light and shadow. No one else seemed to notice, but we were mesmerized. Looking back, I believe it was a clash between good and evil. At first, I was more curious than scared. But that changed one evening while I was lying across my bed, engrossed in a book. Out of nowhere, I felt a hand touch my foot. It wasn't a faint sensation. It was hard pressure, gripping the sole of my foot. That was when I realized whatever this was, it could touch me. Things escalated quickly after that. A few nights later, my mom and sister returned home late. As they pulled into the driveway, the headlights swept across something horrifying. My sister saw it first, a towering, hairy figure like a buffalo on its hind legs, running around the house, trying to avoid the light. My mom didn't see it, but my sister was visibly shaken. She told me it must have been after me and begged me to do something. Her fear was raw, and for the first time, I felt truly horrified. The next morning, I found myself alone in the house. A rare occurrence for a Saturday. Determined to end it, I cleansed the house and blessed every room. Then I got rid of the book. I returned it to the library, but I never saw it again. Despite frequenting the same section, the book was nowhere to be found. I have a strong suspicion it was never meant to be there in the first place. The thought of destroying the book never crossed my mind. All I wanted was for it and the evil it had brought to go back to wherever it came from. Thankfully, it worked. The shadows disappeared, the strange light ceased, and I never experienced anything like that again. The ordeal left a mark. I deeply regret subjecting my sister to such terror, but the experience strengthened my faith in ways I never imagined. I now know what's out there, and I hold on to my belief to keep it at bay. Those 2 weeks taught me a hard lesson. These things are real. They're not just stories or games. They're dangerous. I was lucky to recognize the growing threat and act before it consumed me. I hope my experience serves as a warning. Some doors should never be opened, and once they are, the cost of closing them can be higher than you realize. Last week, I visited my family in southern Wisconsin. My siblings and I, all in our late 20s and married, love gathering at my mom's house for weekends whenever we can. These reunions usually start after dinner and last well into the early morning hours. We chat, play games like Guitar Hero or Wii, and of course, share ghost stories, real ones from our own lives or those of close friends. That weekend, I shared a story I'd kept to myself for years. It was more than just a ghost story. It was a memory that had haunted me since childhood. For as long as I could remember, I had recurring nightmares of a night filled with bright lights, my parents arguing, and the terrifying image of my dad holding a rifle. I was no older than 3 or 4, judging by my size and the fragments of memories I could piece together. In the dream, I remember my younger brother Tony, only a toddler at the time, crying inconsolably in my mom's arms. The entire house was dark except for the light spilling out from my parents' bedroom. I followed my mom to the kitchen as she tried to calm Tony with a bottle, his wails echoing in the humid California night. My dad stood by the kitchen window, rifle in hand, scanning the driveway as if he were preparing for a battle. A Vietnam War veteran, he moved with the precision of someone back in combat, peering through the curtains and surveying the area. Then I saw it. Sitting in the driver's seat of my dad's blue Volvo station wagon was a shadow, a dark figure so black it seemed to absorb the surrounding light. I froze. "Daddy, who is in the car?" I asked, pointing toward the driveway. My dad turned, his gaze following my finger. "Who?" "I don't see anyone," he said, continuing to survey the driveway. The figure remained motionless, its shape barely distinguishable from the surrounding darkness. But then it opened its eyes, 2 glowing, flaming red orbs that burned into the night, looking directly at us. Fear gripped me as I stammered, "I see red eyes, Mommy." Tony in his voice echoed, "Red eyes, Mommy." The headlights of the station wagon suddenly turned on, flooding the driveway with light and making my dad jump. Without hesitation, he bolted back to the house. We ran to the bedroom together, barricading ourselves in. The rest of the night passed in a blur, punctuated by the sound of the car horn blaring intermittently. The next morning, I ventured outside to find my dad washing his car. What I saw will never leave me. Maggots. Thousands of them were leaking from the engine, spilling onto the driveway in a grotesque display. For years, I believed this was nothing more than a recurring nightmare. But that weekend, as I recounted the story to my siblings, something unexpected happened. Tony's face turned pale, and his jaw dropped. "I thought that was my nightmare," he said. "I remember those red eyes in Dad's Volvo." Our older sister chimed in, saying she remembered Mom and Dad bursting into her room that night, sleeping on the floor, and telling her to stay quiet as the car horn blared outside. She, too, recalled the maggots covering the driveway the next morning. Later, I asked my mom about it. At first, she was reluctant to talk. "It's for your protection," she said. "It's bad to know too much." But Tony and I begged her to share what she knew. Finally, she admitted that Dad had been having unsettling dreams before that night. In them, his ancestors warned him about a demon. He never told Mom about these dreams, which is what had sparked their argument that night. She confessed that while Tony and I pointed out the red eyes, neither she nor Dad could see them until the car headlights turned on, revealing the shadowy figure sitting inside. 20 years later, I finally have closure. The nightmares no longer haunt me because I know it wasn't just a dream. Unfortunately, my father passed away before we could talk to him about that night. Mom still prefers to stay quiet about the incident, but for me, just knowing it was real is enough. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story takes place in 1986, when I was 8 years old. It was June, just a week or two before Father's Day, and we had gathered for my grandfather's funeral. After the wake, the entire family made their way to the graveyard, as is customary. The adults stood solemnly near the grave, speaking quietly among themselves. Meanwhile, All of us kids, about 20 in total, were farther back, restless and impatient. Some of us were talking. Others were playing tag around the headstones. Looking back, it wasn't the most respectful behavior, but we were just little kids trying to pass the time. Then it happened. All at once, the world seemed to go silent. The chatter of the kids stopped, the birds ceased chirping, and even the murmurs of the adults faded into nothingness. I couldn't hear a single sound. Confused, I glanced around, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. There, along the edge of the graveyard at the tree line, something was walking. I weaved through the other kids, drawn to the figure, needing a clearer look. And there it was. The devil. Red skin, horns, a tail. Exactly how you'd imagine it. I froze, my body refused to move, my voice caught in my throat. All I could do was stand there, staring in absolute terror. I don't know how long I stood like that, but eventually I became aware of my little brother standing beside me. He was only 5 at the time, and I don't remember him coming over. He was just there, his small hand gripping mine. I was still too scared to move, but the need to protect him pushed me forward. Grabbing his hand tightly, I led him toward our mom, keeping my eyes on the tree line, where the devil continued to walk. When we found her, I tried desperately to get her attention. My little brother was crying by this point, and I was probably crying too. "Look over there," I shouted, pointing toward the tree line. My mom, frustrated by the disruption, pulled us aside. "What's wrong with you two?" she asked, clearly trying to calm us down. I pleaded with her to look again, and she finally turned her head. "It's just a man," she said, "a man walking at the edge of the graveyard." Her words hit me like a blow. "A man?" I repeated, confused. "You see a man?" She nodded and said, "Yes. A man in a black suit. He's probably staying over there so he doesn't disturb us." She brushed off my fear, telling me to calm down and reminding us that this was a funeral. A time to be respectful. I clung to her for the rest of the service. My little brother pressed tightly to her other side. The rest of the family didn't see anything unusual. Not the adults, not the other kids. No one except me, and maybe my little brother. For years, I tried to talk to him about what we saw that day. Every time I brought it up, he'd deny seeing anything and accuse me of scaring him. Eventually, I stopped asking. But deep down, I know he saw it too. His denial only grew stronger as the years went by, and I always wondered if that day left a mark on him. His life was troubled. Detention homes, prison, drugs, a path filled with darkness. I can't help but wonder if that day in the graveyard had something to do with it. I finally told my mom about it a year after the funeral. To my surprise, she believed me. She apologized for not taking my fears seriously at the time, but the damage was already done. That day remains one of the most vivid memories of my life. Even now, decades later, I can still picture the devil walking along the edge of the graveyard, his red form burned into my mind. It was a fear so deep, so visceral, that it stayed with me ever since. About 9 years ago, when I was 15, my cousins and I made a big mistake. We decided to try witchcraft. We bought a spell book, candles, and even created an altar. We found an old mirror, drew a pentagram on the back, and used it as the center for our spells. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that the pentagram was upside down, which allowed negative spirits to enter. For the first 3 months, it seemed harmless. But then strange things started happening. Every weekend, when I stayed over at my cousin's house, I would see a little girl in the mirror behind me while brushing my hair. I knew the house wasn't haunted before, so this was new and unsettling. My cousin, whom I'll call Lynn, also started seeing through the mirrors. A young man, a little girl, a boy, and even a dog. At first, we thought it was just old house vibes. Since they didn't seem threatening, we weren't too scared, but things soon got worse. Lynn started waking up with scratches and gouges on her back. But when we showed them to someone else, they would disappear. One night, after returning home late, the house was freezing cold, even though it was summer. We assumed Lynn's parents weren't home, but when we sat on the porch, her parents came outside, confused about why we were out there. They had been home the entire time. Things took a darker turn when the figures in the mirrors changed. Their eyes glowed red, and their forms turned completely black. They were everywhere, in every mirror. We realized we had let something evil into the house. Lynn's mom asked us, "What did you do?" We knew we had to fix it, but had no idea how. For 2 months, we lived in fear. We decided to get rid of all the witchcraft items, but they kept reappearing. Eventually, we burned everything and prayed while the smoke, thick and black, rose into the air. This helped close the portal we had opened, but it didn't get rid of the entities already in the house. Desperate for help, we went to the chapel near the cemetery next to Lynn's house and prayed to God for forgiveness. As we left, we saw 2 angel statues by the door. Seeing them brought us to tears. We felt a strange mix of fear and peace, as though things would be okay. Back at home, Lynn's mom gave us each a gold cross to wear and a Bible. She called a priest who agreed to bless the house. After the blessing, the hauntings stopped completely. We haven't had any experiences since then. That ordeal brought me closer to my faith, and I've learned my lesson. I'll never forget what we went through, and I'll never look back. This happened during my college years. It was summer vacation, and I was spending time with family and friends. My mother and sister had gone with some older relatives to visit family in the province, and we planned to meet them at my grandparents' house the next morning. I was alone in my room, surrounded by religious icons, which gave me a sense of safety. My friends had gone out to enjoy the cool mountain air, but I was tired from the travel and decided to stay in and rest. Sitting on my bed, I was reading a book to relax and take my off-university worries. Suddenly, I felt a strange presence near the room. At first, I ignored it and kept reading, but soon I heard someone softly calling my name. The voice was gentle and familiar, but it seemed to come from every corner of the room. Then I noticed the air smelled faintly of sulfur. I could sense something malicious, and my heart began to race. The voice became more menacing, saying, "I know who you are," followed by my family name in a tone filled with rage. I dropped my book, frozen in fear. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to distance myself from the entity. Repeating Psalm 23 in my mind, I focused only on my voice, hoping to block out everything else. But the atmosphere grew worse. My face tingled, and I felt unbearable pressure on the left side, as if it was being crushed. My body felt heavy and numb. I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but fear gripped me and no words came out. Then horrifying images filled my mind. Tortures, murders, and disturbing rituals. I could hear it laughing, a cruel mix of male and female voices. Desperate, I reached for the rosary in my back pocket, my last hope. My hands were so numb that I couldn't feel the beads, but I gripped it tightly and began praying the Lord's Prayer aloud. For a moment, the malicious presence seemed to fade, but then it began mocking me, repeating the prayer in a twisted voice, as if it was right next to my ear. Remembering advice from a priest, I changed my prayer to the Apostles' Creed, pouring all my faith into every word. Slowly, I felt its grip weaken. The air in the room shifted, the hissing and mocking stopped, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I stood up, trembling but determined. The entity hissed one last time before the room went silent. As I calmed down, I noticed blood dripping from my left hand. I had clenched the rosary so tightly that it cut into my palm. After washing the wound in the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and saw a dark hooded figure standing behind me. This wasn't my first encounter with this presence. I quietly said, "I'm fine," and it disappeared. About 30 minutes later, I heard my friends and cousins screaming from the guest house. They were trembling as they explained what had happened. They'd been using a Ouija board variation called Spirit of the Glass, and had contacted an entity named Caleb. At first it seemed harmless, but soon it turned hostile, spelling out profanities. When they tried to close the session, the glass shattered, cutting one of my friends. Chairs were thrown, windows vibrated, and they were trapped in the room for 45 terrifying minutes before everything stopped. Oddly, their experience started around the same time as mine. My friend who initiated the session later told me she smelled sulfur right after starting the ritual and heard laughter as the chairs moved. The next morning, we told our relatives, but they claimed they hadn't heard any screaming or noises, even though the room was in complete disarray with a broken chair and overturned furniture. My aunt immediately called a priest to bless the room. To this day, I have unanswered questions. What was that entity? How did it escape the room? Why did it single me out? And how did it know my family name? A few weeks ago, I started thinking about my encounters again. It didn't bother me to remember or talk about them, so I asked my mom why these things happen. We had a long conversation about what to do if something like that ever happened again. She even shared one of her own experiences, and it shook me. She told me about a Sunday morning at church. She was sitting in the congregation, listening to the preacher, when suddenly, instead of seeing his face, she saw a monster-like figure with huge eyes. It lasted only for a split second, and she wasn't sure if it was real, so she didn't say anything. Later that day, someone from the church called my grandparents, asking if anyone had seen anything strange during the service. That's when my grandmother asked my mom, and the memory came rushing back. She screamed, realizing what she had seen. It reminded me of my own experience with the eyes, and I couldn't help but feel there was some connection, even though I'm adopted. After hearing her story, I was unsettled, but didn't talk about it again. A few nights later, my little brother slept on the floor in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone, or something, was there with us. I closed my eyes tightly, but I could sense it standing at the head of my bed. Eventually, I opened one eye and saw a shadowy figure. I couldn't see its face, just its torso and legs. Terrified, I shut my eyes again and started saying Lord in my mind, knowing I might not even be able to speak aloud. The fear wasn't as intense as it had been in the past, but I still felt paralyzed. Suddenly, I began to see a bright light, even though my eyes were shut. It wasn't the reddish glow you see when sunlight hits your closed eyelids. This was pure white. I kept my eyes shut, afraid it might be something bad, but the fear and heaviness eased when the light appeared. Then I heard a strange sound, a mix of fireworks, wind, and water. I will never forget. It's the kind of thing you do in a small town. They had 3 beautiful little boys, and over time, I got to know and care for them a lot. While talking to the mom, I offered to babysit if they ever needed help. For a while, they didn't call me for babysitting, but the wife, who wasn't much older than me, wanted to hang out. We became great friends, and through that, the boys got to know me better too. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, chatting, she confided that the house gave her an eerie feeling. She even said she thought it might be haunted. It was an old house after all, and who knows what could have happened there. Just as we were talking about this, her oldest son, Jet, who was 5 at the time, came into the room and said, "Mommy, Ashley, do you hear those screams? Mommy, help that man." We froze. Amanda, his mom, asked, "What man are you talking about?" Jet pointed and said, "The man at the bottom of the stairs, Mommy. He's on fire. Help him get some water." We were both completely freaked out. We walked to the bottom of the stairs, but of course, saw nothing. We decided to brush it off. The very next day, we were outside relaxing when Jet came up to us and said, "Mommy, I'm going inside to play with the good brothers." We thought he meant his younger brothers and let him go, but a few minutes later, we saw the other 2 boys still playing in the sandbox. Confused, I went inside to check on him. I found Jet in the toy room talking loudly and laughing. I asked him, "Who are you talking to?" He looked at me and said, "The good brothers, Ashley." That's when I ran outside to get Amanda, and we both started to feel uneasy. We decided to look into the house's history. Searching through old papers we found in the barn, we discovered that there had been a fire in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs, and a man had died in the flames. We pulled back the carpet at the bottom of the stairs and found a large burn mark on the floor. Chills ran through me. At first, we thought the good brothers might just be Jet's imagination, but then we found something else. The house had 3 floors. Above the attic, there was a small loft with windows overlooking the town. One night, we went up there to look around. The walls were covered in writing with signatures and quotes from as far back as the 1890s. We decided to sign it too, but as we were looking, I noticed something written above my head. "Long live the good brothers." Jet couldn't have written that. He was only 5 years old and barely tall enough to reach the lower part of the wall. We ran downstairs, terrified. There was also a hallway with 2 extra bedrooms they didn't use. They kept the hallway shut off, but the washer and dryer were located there, so I had to go in occasionally to do laundry. That hallway always felt heavy, and one of the bedrooms gave me the creeps. I usually ran past it if I had to go to the laundry room. I later found out that the previous owner's husband had died in that room from lung cancer caused by tobacco. Just a few days after I learned this, Jet mentioned hearing Uncle Charlie coughing upstairs and said it was bothering him. We asked him who Uncle Charlie was, and he said, "The man that sleeps in the room next to the washer." Amanda and I were stunned. The previous owner's husband's name was Charles. There was no way Jet could have known that. Eventually, the family moved to Italy. The house was later sold to the superintendent of my old high school. She doesn't have young kids and says she hasn't noticed anything strange. Still, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to that house than meets the eye. My name is Andrea, and I'm a single mother to a 2-year-old little girl. I moved into my home 8 years ago when I was engaged to my now ex-husband. Elderly neighbors told me the houses in our community were built in the 1950s, intended as affordable housing for returning war veterans. About a year after moving in, I decided to get a small dog for companionship while my husband worked late. That's when the strange behavior started. My 8-month-old pup, Clee, began barking viciously down the hallway, always facing the door that now serves as my daughter's room. Her hackles would rise and she'd shake uncontrollably. Strangely, Clee refused to enter the room. At the time, it was just a guest room used for storage. I chalked her behavior up to a quirky personality and didn't think much of it. Years passed and I barely thought about Clee's odd behavior until one night. I was watching TV with Clee curled up in my lap when she suddenly started shaking. Every hair on her back stood up. She whimpered, licked her lips in submission, and jumped onto the back of the couch, barking ferociously. She was so frantic she bit her tongue. I tried to calm her, but I was terrified. What was she seeing that I couldn't? When my husband got home, I told him what had happened. He laughed it off, saying, "You girls have been watching too many scary movies." But it kept happening, even when he was home. He would scold Clee each time, dismissing her behavior as nonsense. In 2004, I found out I was pregnant. By this time, my husband was having Before I started school, I lived in Jordan with my family. When I turned 5, my father's work required us to move to a remote part of Saudi Arabia. My mom, my little sister, and I followed him there. The transition was hard for me. Being a shy, quiet child, I already struggled to make friends back in Jordan. Moving to a new country with a completely different lifestyle and culture only made it worse. I missed my grandmother deeply. She had been like a second mother to me. The new neighborhood was unwelcoming. It had tall fences, old buildings, and a claustrophobic design. Each apartment had only small windows high above the doors, so it was impossible to see anyone walking by without opening the front door. For a 5-year-old, the place felt like a prison. Unsurprisingly, I didn't make any friends. I kept to myself, spending hours alone. One day after school, I was sitting on my bed, writing in a piano-shaped notebook my grandmother had given me. As I wrote about my feelings, tears streamed down my face. "No one loves you. No one wants to be your friend," I whispered to myself. That's when I heard it, a knock from inside my closet. I froze, staring at the door. The knock came again, louder this time. I screamed and ran to my mom, who searched the closet and assured me there was nothing inside. Still, I couldn't shake the fear. The next night, I was watching cartoons with my 2-year-old sister when I heard my mom calling me from the kitchen. I went to find her, but instead saw a young girl standing there. She stared at me silently. Excited at the thought of having a friend, I smiled and said hi. But she didn't respond. My mom suddenly appeared behind me and asked, "What are you doing in here?" I turned to her and said, "Mom, I made a friend, see." But when I looked back, the girl was gone. At the time, I didn't fully understand what had happened. I went back to watching TV, but moments later stood up, walked to the counter, and pushed the television off it, breaking it. My mom rushed in, demanding to know what had happened. I told her my friend told me to. My mom assumed I had created an imaginary friend out of loneliness, but this was far from imaginary. The next day, as I wrote in my piano notebook, something wrote back, "How are you?" Surprised but curious, I answered, "I'm okay." My mom overheard me talking but dismissed it as more imaginary play. When I asked the notebook who it was, it responded, "I'm 16. What about you?" I wrote back, "I'm 7. That's how it all began. One night, my parents went grocery shopping, leaving me to babysit my little sister. I woke up terrified, pointing at the wall in front of my bed, though I can't remember why. I decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. On my way, I passed the storeroom where my mom had locked all my sister's dolls after I became terrified of them. As I passed, I heard knocking from inside the storeroom. My blood ran cold. A voice called my name, playful and teasing, as if we were playing hide and seek. It was her, the 16-year-old girl I thought was my friend. Panicked, I called my mom's friend, our next-door neighbor. She picked up, but I could barely speak. "Help me. Please help me." I screamed. She told me to calm down and asked where my mom was. Suddenly, I heard the sound of breaking plates in the kitchen. I ran to the front door trying to escape, but it was locked. I could hear the neighbor on the other side trying to open it. The storeroom door creaked open behind me, and that's when I passed out from fear. I'm 22 now and have been back in Jordan since I was 12, but I know she's still with me. I feel her presence, hear her humming, and sometimes dream about her. Why is she still attached to me? Was it my loneliness that made me an easy target? I don't know why she wants to hurt me, but even after all these years, I can't shake the fears she left behind. This all started about 9 years ago. At the time, my oldest son was my only child, and we were living with my parents. Recently, financial struggles have brought us back to the same house where all these events took place. I can't pinpoint exactly when it began, but I know it was shortly after we had an ADT system installed, which required going into the attic. One night, I was sitting in the living room with my son. My stepdad had just gone back to work after recovering from surgery. I was on the phone with my brother-in-law when I noticed my son quietly crying, more like sniffles than full sobs. Concerned, I asked him what was wrong. He looked up at me and said, "Papa's gone, and he's not coming home." I reassured him, telling him that Papa was just at work and would be back in the morning, but he shook his head and said, "No, he's gone." He told me so. Thinking maybe Papa had said something to him, I asked, "Who told you, Papa?" He pointed to the wall where a picture of a deer was hanging and said, "No, him." Confused, I asked, "Who?" "Him, Mommy. Him, right there," he said, pointing again at the picture. We went back and forth for a while. with me trying to figure out who he was talking about. Frustrated, he glared at me, lowering his head and looking up through his eyelashes, a chilling expression I'd never seen on my sweet 2-year-old. I pulled him into my lap, and he quickly fell asleep. That night was the beginning of the strange events in the house. Lights started turning off by themselves. Things would disappear, only to reappear later. Sometimes we hear odd noises, but we brushed it off as everyday occurrences. When my youngest son came along, he started having his own experiences. As a baby, he would lie in his crib, smiling and laughing at nothing, always looking up at the ceiling. We thought he was just a happy baby, but as he grew older, he began complaining about someone tapping him on the shoulder. When we checked, there was nothing there. We tried comforting him, and he'd smile, saying it had stopped. The room they shared became a source of fear. During the day, they were fine, but at night, they refused to go in, especially if it was dark. One night, my youngest needed his blanket. I went into the room, and he hesitated at the doorway. Wanting to help him overcome his fear, I made him come in with me. He walked to the bed, but when I pulled him onto my lap, he was trembling so hard that I could feel it shaking my body. "What's wrong?" I asked. The boy said this is his room, not ours. "We're not allowed in it," he whispered. I was stunned. He was only 2 years old and didn't have the imagination to come up with something like that. His fear was genuine. We decided to switch rooms with the boys, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. I taught my son to say, "This is my house," or "Leave me alone," whenever he felt scared. Sometimes I'd hear him playing alone, only to suddenly shout, "Leave me alone." Now we have a daughter who's 1.5 years old. She often wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, sometimes trembling as if from a bad dream. Every time I go into her room, I make it a point to say loudly, "Leave my children alone." One day, I decided to try some EVP work. Using a tape recorder, I caught a voice, a young child saying, "You hear?" The voice was curious and sweet. When I played it for my boys without mentioning what I'd heard, both of their faces lit up. They heard it too. Recently, my mother shared her own experience. While lying in bed one night, she felt the covers being tugged, as if a small child was trying to climb onto the bed. She ignored it and turned onto her side. Moments later, she felt the bed bounce, as if someone were jumping on it beside her. I don't know who or what is in the house, but it seems to be connected to the children. It doesn't feel evil, but it's unsettling, especially when it frightens my kids. I wonder if it's the same childlike presence we've encountered before, and if it will ever leave us in peace. My ex-husband and I dropped off our 3 children at his sister's house to spend the night. We had a party to attend and planned to be late, so we decided it would be best to pick them up early the next morning. According to my sister-in-law, this is what happened while we were away. The kids, my 2 girls, my son, her daughter, and her son, were playing in the toy room. Out of nowhere, all 3 of my children came out and told her they wanted to go home. They said they didn't want to stay there anymore. My sister-in-law was confused because our kids usually got along really well, so she asked them why. They only said they were scared, but couldn't explain further. She managed to get my youngest, who was 4 at the time, to sleep in the bedroom with her daughter. However, my other 2 children refused to stay in the room and insisted on staying in the living room. She laid them down on the 2 sofas, then sat nearby, reading a book while they slept. Suddenly, my son started talking in his sleep. She tried to listen, but she couldn't make sense of anything he was saying. A moment later, my daughter also began talking in the same gibberish as my son. What terrified my sister-in-law was that it sounded like they were having a conversation. The way they spoke to each other seemed like a back-and-forth exchange, and it grew increasingly heated. Then my daughter started tossing and turning as if she wanted to get up but couldn't. Alarmed, my sister-in-law called their names and tried to wake them. Just as she was trying to process what was happening, she felt a hand touch her from behind. She turned around, startled, with her fist raised, only to find my 4-year-old daughter standing there, saying, "I'm ready to go." Confused, she asked, "Go where?" My daughter replied, "Mommy and Daddy are coming to get us now." My sister-in-law pulled her onto her lap and glanced back at the other two kids. They were lying completely still, sound asleep and silent. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was my ex-husband and me. We had returned earlier than planned, because neither of us felt comfortable at the party. For some reason, we both had an uneasy feeling, so we decided to check on the kids. If they were awake, we'd take them home. If not, we'd stay the night at my sister-in-law's house. We came in, completely unaware of what had just happened, removed the kids to the spare bedroom and went to bed. My sister-in-law didn't mention anything that night. The next morning, though, she asked me if anything like that had ever happened before. I was confused and said, "No. What are you talking about?" She explained everything that had occurred the night before, saying she'd been terrified. She described the way my kids seemed to be speaking in tongues, though she could barely explain what that meant. Her description left me uneasy, but seeing my discomfort, she tried to downplay it, saying maybe it was nothing and I was just overreacting. Still, neither of us could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later, I sat my children down and asked them about the toy room and what had happened. They didn't seem to know what I was talking about. All they could tell me was that they didn't feel comfortable in the toy room because, as they put it, the people there don't like us. It's been 2 years since that night, and I've never experienced anything like it again. I still wonder what it could have been. Could it really have been nothing, or was there something deeper going on? I also don't fully understand what my sister-in-law meant by speaking in tongues. She explained it as best as she could, but it didn't make sense to me. My children only know English and Spanish, so it couldn't have been another language they'd learned. I tried researching similar experiences online, but haven't found anything that matches. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? What exactly does speaking in tongues mean in this context? I've been experiencing the paranormal for as long as I can remember. Growing up in Connecticut, a state not particularly known for its hauntings, I somehow never had trouble encountering the other side. Even now, living in Florida, those experiences have stayed with me. The earliest memory I have of the paranormal goes back to preschool. I had a deep fear of the dark, a fear that still lingers today. At that age, I would sometimes wet the bed because I was too terrified to leave it for the bathroom. I always felt a presence in the darkness watching me. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there waiting. One particularly terrifying night, I desperately needed to use the bathroom, but was paralyzed with fear. I sat in bed, crying, convinced that something was waiting to hurt me if I stepped out of the covers. That's when my closet door creaked open by itself. I'd always heard strange rustling in the closet and avoided it unless absolutely necessary. I tried waking my older brother who was sleeping in the same room, but he didn't stir. I pulled the blanket over me, peeking out just enough to watch the closet. Something inside was moving. It was a different presence from the one that filled the darkness. I thought it might be another entity coming to join forces with the one already haunting me, but what stepped out of the closet wasn't evil. The figure was entirely black, completely devoid of color from head to toe. It was tall, with arms slightly longer than a human's and strange, thick fingers at the ends. I couldn't tell if they were hands or something else entirely. The being had no discernible face or features, yet I could sense it was male. He emerged slowly, almost like he was rolling into an upright position in slow motion. I was terrified at first, my heart pounding in my chest. He stood to his full height, looked around the room, and then focused on me. But as he looked at me, a calmness washed over me. This being wasn't here to hurt me. I could feel it. Despite my fear, I smiled. The being walked toward my bed and held out what I assumed was his hand. Telepathically, I understood him asking, "Do you need to use the bathroom?" Though he didn't speak, his words were clear in my mind. I nodded, still smiling, and took his hand. He reassured me that he would keep me safe. We walked together to the bathroom, and he waited just outside while I finished. Afterward, he He led me back to bed, promising to protect me from anything that might try to harm me. I believed him. From that moment on, I called him Blackie. Not the most creative name I know, but it fit. Blackie became a part of my life. My mom assumed he was an imaginary friend, but my older brother admitted he could see him too. Blackie lived in my closet and, oddly enough, in the stove in our kitchen. I remember insisting on getting him out before my mom could cook or bake anything. For a long time, Blackie was always there for me. When I was scared, he would appear, and I never felt alone. But as I grew older, I stopped seeing him. I will never forget. This happened 11 years ago when I was 20 years old, living in my first apartment with my then boyfriend Mark. It was a charming vintage-style space on the second floor, right above a liquor store in an older neighborhood of San Diego, California. The building had its age, but it always felt peaceful, at least until this incident. Mark was working as an electrician's apprentice for a small but respected company. At the time, he and his boss were working on old Victorian houses just outside downtown, most of which were vacant due to remodeling. One day, while working alone in the attic of one of these houses, Mark came across something unusual, a small hand-carved wooden canoe. It was about the length of his forearm, not very detailed, but it stood out against the empty space. He figured someone had left it behind in the rush to clear the house. When his boss stopped by to check in, Mark showed him the canoe and asked if he could take it home. His boss agreed, reasoning that the house was owned by the bank and everything else had already been discarded. Mark was excited to bring it back and show me. That evening, after settling in, Mark retrieved the canoe from his car and brought it upstairs. It was an intriguing little piece, and as a collector of antiques, I thought it would look perfect on a shelf in our bedroom. We admired it briefly before moving on with our night. Things took a strange turn when I started my nightly routine. As I washed my face and brushed my teeth, an overwhelming sense of negativity settled around me, a dark, heavy energy that felt almost suffocating. It was so intense that I asked Mark to stay with me as I finished getting ready for bed. He thought I was overreacting, but he stayed anyway. We went to bed exhausted and quickly fell asleep, but my rest didn't last long. About an hour later, I woke up and that same negative energy was back, stronger this time. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but something even darker, like a powerful, oppressive presence in the room. I lay frozen, unable to even muster the courage to get up and use the bathroom. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep but woke again after another hour. This time, things got stranger. The computer in our room, which we rarely used and always kept off, was suddenly on. It made odd noises, and the monitor flashed on and off. Yet when I checked the power strip, it was off. I sat up in disbelief, only to find Mark already awake, staring at me. He admitted he hadn't been able to sleep either. Tossing and turning all night, he'd felt the same oppressive energy I did. Without another word, we grabbed our blankets and moved to the living room floor, desperate for some peace. The next morning, over breakfast, we recounted our unsettling night and agreed it had to be the canoe. It was the only new thing in our space, and its arrival had coincided with the disturbing events. We decided to get rid of it after work. That evening, I grabbed the canoe and we drove to a park in the next neighborhood over. We didn't want to leave it anywhere near our apartment. At the first trash can we found, I told Mark to toss it, but something strange happened. He couldn't do it. He stood there holding the canoe, visibly uncomfortable. He said it felt physically wrong to throw it away, like he was unable to make himself drop it into the trash. Instead, he set it on top of the trash can. I argued that leaving it out in the open felt irresponsible, that someone else might find it and experience what we had, but Mark was adamant. I gave up and walked away. Later that night, I asked him why he hadn't just thrown it away. He admitted he didn't know, only that it felt impossible, like an invisible force was stopping him. Once the canoe was gone, however, the oppressive energy vanished and we never experienced anything like it again. To this day, I wonder about that canoe. What was its history and why did it bring such negativity with it? I'll never know, but I'm glad it's no longer in our lives. When I was about 17, I had a late-night conversation with my dad about magic, ghosts, and the supernatural. As we spoke, he decided to put up some mental barriers around the house for protection. When he finished, he looked at me curiously and asked a strange question. "Is Grace under your bed?" I was startled. Grace was the name I had given to a little girl ghost who lived in our kitchen. She didn't speak, but I could sense her presence. My dad rarely mentioned Grace in our discussions. He didn't dislike her, but felt uneasy because he couldn't sense her the way I could. So, hearing her name from him caught me off guard. We were sitting in the living room, far from my room, so I was confused as to how he could feel anything under my bed. I wasn't as trained as I am now, but I reached out to feel for Grace's presence. I didn't have to go far. She was standing right behind the couch where I was sitting, clearly intrigued by our conversation. After confirming it was Grace, I told my dad she wasn't under my bed. He hesitated before asking, "Are there any other spirits in the house that might be hiding under your bed?" I had been sensing an unfamiliar energy in the house for a while, but being young and untrained, I hadn't mentioned it. "No, there's no one else," I replied. Curious, we decided to investigate. My room was a disaster zone, an overwhelming mess that was almost too much to deal with. Hesitantly, I began pulling things out from under my bed. Among the clutter, I found a few memento boxes in my purse. For reasons I still can't explain, I had shoved it under my bed. When I tried to put the purse aside, my dad stopped me, staring at it like it was dangerous. We took it to the kitchen, where he watched as I emptied its contents. His interest piqued when I pulled out a necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, which had a hidden pentagram on it. But the real trouble began when I pulled out a bracelet. The bracelet was nothing special, just a replica of a movie prop. I won't say which movie, but you probably laugh. It was new, not old, and yet it made my dad visibly uneasy. He picked it up and tried to sense its energy, but couldn't see into it. Finally, he asked me to put it on. I hesitated, but I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. It scraped against my skin as I did, making me wince. My dad watched carefully and then told me to take it off. When I tried, it wouldn't budge. It clung stubbornly to my wrist, and the more I pulled, the more it hurt. "It doesn't want to come off, does it?" My dad asked, his voice sounding unfamiliar, almost not his own. "It doesn't want to be put on, but once it is, it won't let go." Eventually, I managed to remove it, and my dad attempted to cleanse it using his energy. That's when things took a terrifying turn. As he worked, I felt like I was suffocating. It was as if the walls were closing in, and I couldn't think or breathe properly. Panicked, I begged him to stop. He did, confused, but the pressure didn't subside. Without thinking, I began speaking. It was a little boy. He was trapped. Your spell, he couldn't break away. He was panicked. I don't fully remember what happened next, but I slipped into what felt like a trance. I saw a little boy and what appeared to be a demon. Instinctively, I let down my mental shields to try and protect the boy, but as I did, he morphed into a dark, malevolent shadow. Just as it began to close in on me, I heard a young girl's voice scream. "No." My shield snapped back up, and the shadow was pushed away. I'm convinced the voice belonged to Grace. I believe she saved my life, or at least my sanity. My dad and I later theorized that the bracelet had been made from metal salvaged from a car crash. The boy who died in the crash had attached himself to the metal, bitter and angry about his death. I tried cleansing the bracelet with water and table salt, but it didn't work. I still have the bracelet to this day. Recently, I showed it to a friend who told me every fiber of his being urged him to destroy it. Maybe he's right, but for now it stays tucked away, out of sight, but never out of mind. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. My boyfriend and I are big gamers, but with university back in session, we haven't been able to spend much time together. One Saturday, we planned a day to fix that, starting with a visit to a flea market for game hunting and then spending the rest of the day gaming together like we had over the summer. At the flea market, I spotted a classic Legend of Zelda cartridge and knew I had to have it. I'm a huge Zelda fan. And no, this isn't one of those stories where the seller hands it over with an ominous warning to never bring it back. I bought it fair and square, complete with a week-long warranty. If there was an issue, I could return it for a different game of equal or lesser value. Afterward, my boyfriend and I wandered the market for fun, and he bought some beads that expand in water. He joked that we could have a bead fight once they were squishy. When we got home, we popped the cartridge into my Nintendo and started playing. After a couple of hours, we decided to take a break and grab dinner at Red Robin. When my boyfriend dropped me off later, he told me to keep playing and see if I could find any secrets in the game while he headed home. That night, I turned the Nintendo back on to continue playing, but our save file was gone. My first thought was, great, the cartridge's battery must be dead. I'll have to return it when the flea market opens next Saturday. To be sure, I made a new save file, turned the console off, and then back on. The new save was still there. Confused, I texted my boyfriend, who shrugged it off, saying it was just another reason to spend another Saturday gaming with me. The next day, I came home to find something strange. The lights in the kitchen and bedroom, which I always left on for the dogs, were off, and the tulip-scented wax from my scent lamp had been splashed across my pillow. I called my mom to ask if she'd stopped by while I was out, but she said she hadn't. It unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe I'd just forgotten to leave the lights on. For the next few weeks, things were normal. Then one night, everything changed. My mom was on a date and had told me she wouldn't be home. I was alone playing my Xbox 360 when I heard a yelp from one of my dogs. I looked over to see one of my Nintendo controllers lying at her feet. It had flown across the room and hit her. That I couldn't explain away. Angry and freaked out, I shouted, "If you're real, stop hurting my dogs or I'm getting rid of the cartridge." Since that night, the dogs haven't been hurt, but other strange things keep happening. The door locks come undone on their own. The air conditioning switch gets turned off without explanation. The TV shuts off randomly, and if my bedroom door is slightly open, it will slowly swing shut with a forceful slam. I haven't gotten rid of the cartridge yet, but part of me wonders if I should. Whatever's happening, it's made itself clear that it doesn't want to be ignored. When I was a young child, I spent countless summers at my grandparents' house in Lassell, Ontario. Their home was an old redwood cedar and angel brick house with a sprawling woodland right behind it. For me, that forest was a magical escape, a place where time seemed frozen. The woods stretched for miles, from the Detroit River to the outskirts of Windsor. Hidden among the dense vines were antique car hulls, their rusting frames like relics of another world. Streams meandered through the trees, filled with pike, and the air was rich with the scent of wild berries and milk pods. As a child, I spent endless days building forts and wandering the surreal expanse. It felt infinite, a perfect sanctuary for a young, adventurous mind. Another unforgettable part of my grandparents' home was the grandfather clock in their hallway. Built from a Sears kit in the 1930s by my grandmother's cousin, it stood as both a practical timepiece and a mysterious artifact to me. My grandfather was always tinkering with it, adjusting its gears, weights, and springs. Sometimes it worked perfectly, chiming on schedule, and other times it was stubbornly silent. Its inner workings were a mystery I couldn't solve, and to me it became a magic clock, an object of both beauty and intrigue. Years passed, and when I was still young, my grandfather passed away after a long illness. He'd been bedridden for many years, and his death, though expected, left a profound sadness. What happened next made it even more poignant. On the nights following his passing, the clock chimed all of its chime selections at midnight, 3 nights in a row. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The clock continued to work, but the chimes never sounded again. We were baffled, but eventually moved on, treating the event as a mysterious farewell. Years later, my grandmother moved out of the house my grandfather had built. It was a sad day for all of us, but she found a cozy condo in Amherstburg, closer to family. The grandfather clock was moved with her, though it no longer worked. It became more of a decorative piece than a functional timepiece. Strangely, after she moved, we heard that the new owners of my grandfather's old house were experiencing something unusual. A neighbor, who was also a family friend, told us that the new occupants often woke up at night to the sound of a clock ticking. Sometimes they even heard the faint cycling of the clock's hands moving. They traced the sound to the hallway where the grandfather clock had once stood. This went on for about a year, until the house underwent a major remodel. After that, the sound stopped. As if that weren't strange enough, years later, after my grandmother passed away, we gathered at her condo following the funeral to reminisce. While we were sharing memories, the grandfather clock chimed. One by one, it played through all of its chime selections. We were stunned. The clock hadn't been working for years. It hadn't even been wound. The room fell silent as we all exchanged wide-eyed glances, sharing a collective moment of awe and disbelief. The clock now rests in my parents' home. After many hours of cleaning and adjusting its innards, and with the help of a clock specialist, we've brought it back to working order. My mom uses it occasionally, but sometimes stops it to take a break from its constant ticking and chiming. Oddly, every now and then, it starts up on its own, giving us those same wow moments we've come to associate with it. This clock holds a special place in my heart. I can't help but wonder if there's a spiritual connection between it and our family, or if it serves as some kind of link to the afterlife. Is it controlled by the spirits of those who cherished it before us? I think about it often. Will it chime again when my parents pass? Will it chime when I do? It's a mystery I may never solve, but it's one I'll always hold dear. This story takes place in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the same house I mentioned in my previous story, haunted by a demonic Doberman. If you've read that one, you'll know that the house across the street from mine had a long history of strange and tragic events. First, the father who hanged himself, supposedly along with his Doberman pinchers, one of which I believe visited me. Then, 25 to 30 years later, the son murdered his own mother with a hammer, and then killed and dumped her body into the backyard well, where it stayed for nearly a year before being discovered. I was 15 at the time of that horrifying murder. Afterward, the house was boarded up and condemned, but it always had a spooky presence. When my friends and I walked past it at night, we'd often stop and stare at the windows. We could swear we saw dim, flickering lights in the upstairs window, almost like candlelight. One summer night, fueled by teenage curiosity, my friends and I decided to sneak into the house. There were 4 of us. We crept into the backyard and found the cellar doors. After arguing about who would go in first, we finally gathered our nerve, opened the doors, and stepped into the pitch-black house. The smell hit us immediately. An awful, rotten stench. We climbed the stairs, hardly able to see in the darkness. I spotted a porcelain doll lying on the ground and impulsively grabbed it. The air felt heavy, as if someone was watching us, and the deeper we went, the more uneasy I felt. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed and bolted for the exit. That was enough for the rest of us. Panicked, we all ran out of the house, screaming. Outside, my friend, still shaking, told us she had heard a woman moaning and felt something grab her. As we left the property, I stopped to pull a small chip of wood off the house, thinking it would be cool to have a souvenir. Back at my house, we decided to hold a séance in the garage with the items I collected, the doll and the wood chip. We were just a bunch of dumb kids trying to scare ourselves. I don't remember anything unusual happening during the seance. Maybe we weren't paying enough attention. Before leaving the garage, I hid the doll and the wood chip in a corner so my grandmother wouldn't find them. A few days later, my sister and I decided to check on the doll. When we opened the garage door, we froze. My late grandfather's toolboxes and tackle boxes had been moved and left wide open, and the doll was sitting in the middle of the floor, not where I'd hidden it. My sister and I grabbed each other in fear, yelling, "Oh my God." I kicked the doll across the garage, closed the toolboxes, and we bolted out of there. It took us over a week to gather the courage to return. When we did, we found the same scene, the toolboxes wide open and the doll back in the middle of the floor. This time, I found an old box, shoved the doll inside, and pushed it under a shelf case. Not long after that, we moved out of my grandmother's house, though that was already planned before the incident. About 10 years later, after my grandmother passed away, my mom came to my house with a box of items she brought from her home. She handed it to me and asked if I wanted to keep it. When I opened it, there it was, that porcelain doll. I couldn't believe it. I told her, "Heck no, get that thing out of my house." Even now, I wonder about that doll. What was manipulating it? What made it move and turn up in the middle of the room? Was it connected to the house across the street or something else entirely? I'll never know, but the memory of that doll still sends chills down my spine. It all started about a year ago after my friend's dad passed away. I was homeless at the time but had a job, and my buddy invited me to move in to help with bills and keep him company. Not long after I moved in, we decided to check out an old abandoned building downtown. It was once an insane asylum, then a retirement home, and finally an apartment complex before being shut down. It had been sitting empty for years. We made our way to the basement, and immediately the air felt heavy like we weren't alone. I'm not someone who scares easily, but every time we turned to leave, it felt like something was following us. Determined to figure it out, I suddenly spun around and ran down the hallway, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was there. I found nothing. The darkness was playing tricks on me, or so I thought. I reunited with my buddy, and we wandered into a room that looked like it used to hold bodies, maybe for a morgue or funeral preparation. The creepy vibe intensified, but I started poking around anyway. Opening the drawers one by one, I found nothing until the very last one. Inside was an old necklace with a triangle-shaped pottery piece attached to a worn hemp string. It was about the size of my hand. The second I picked it up, we heard a voice behind us, low and indistinct like someone speaking. We turned, expecting to see police or someone else, but there was no one there. As we left the building, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. My buddy, clearly shaken, told me to take the necklace back. Reluctantly, I agreed. I jogged back down the hall and returned it to the drawer. As I turned to leave, the drawer slammed shut behind me. Thinking it was my friend playing a prank, I yelled for him to stop messing around, but there was no answer. The door wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled. Then, without warning, it popped open. Shaken, I left and found my friend coming around the corner to check on me. He swore he hadn't done anything. Things started getting strange after that night. At first, it was subtle. Small noises, uneasy feelings. My buddy and I joked that maybe it was his dad's spirit messing with us, but the activity escalated. My dog started waking up in the middle of the night, barking and growling at my closet, which didn't even have a door. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a mouse or my cat. One night, I was playing Xbox when I heard movement behind me. I turned to see my dog staring at the closet, barking hysterically. My roommate walked into my room, looking pale. He pointed at the closet without saying a word, and then turned and went back to his room. Confused, I followed him and found him sound asleep in his bed. He had no memory of coming into my room. I went back to my room, my dog still barking like crazy. As I approached the closet, my jacket from that night fell to the floor. My dog yelped and bolted out of the room. Her tail tucked, My fear turned to anger, and I screamed at the closet, "You're not welcome here. Get out of my house and go back to wherever you came from." My roommate came back, asking what was going on. I told him about the incident, including him pointing at the closet, but he insisted he had no memory of doing that. I picked up my jacket, and as I did, the necklace fell out of my pocket. My roommate froze, staring at it. "I thought you put that back," he said. "So did I replied. The room suddenly went ice cold. Without a word, we grabbed some things and left the house, spending the night at a hotel. The next day, I went back to the building to return the necklace, but it was too late. The building was being torn down. Now strange things happen constantly. My dog wakes up every night, barking at nothing. The air feels heavy and oppressive, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever followed me is still here. I'm at my wit's end. I still have the necklace, and I don't know what to do with it." A friend once offered me a white wicker bed frame set for free. At the time, I lived in a remote mountain area in Hawaii, at an elevation of about 5,500 feet. The house I rented was perched on a hillside, with the upstairs living area raised at least 15 feet off the ground on stilts. My partner at the time went to pick up the bed set one evening, but when he returned, he brought back a completely different, older, antique-looking set. I asked him what happened to the white one, and he simply shrugged, saying, "She gave me this one instead." He mentioned that the bed frame had fallen out of his truck multiple times on the way back, even breaking one of the wooden wheels. He didn't think much of it, but something about the story left me uneasy. For a few days, the bed sat in the guest room, untouched. When I finally started assembling the frames, I was overcome by a sudden wave of nausea. My stomach churned, and I felt like I might throw up. The air in the room felt icy cold, but I chalked it up to the altitude and left the room, shaken but trying not to overthink it. A few nights later, on a quiet Friday evening, my partner called to let me know he'd be out with friends and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I was reading on the couch in the living room when I heard it, loud, deliberate pounding on the wall behind me. At first, I thought it was a joke, but then I realized this wall was 15 feet off the ground. No one could have reached it without a very tall ladder. The pounding stopped, but immediately started again, this time at the back kitchen door, which was closed and locked. Then I heard it, a voice calling my name. My blood ran cold. I knew better than to open the door, especially at night when I was home alone. Grabbing a bat, I called out my partner's name, but there was no answer. Panicked, I reached for the CB radio to try and contact him, but I couldn't get through. I hadn't heard his truck come up the hill, so I knew he wasn't back yet. Terrified, I called my sister and told her what was happening. She stayed on the line with me as I tried to calm myself. At one point, I had to use the bathroom and asked her to stay on the phone while I stepped away. But as soon as I moved a few feet, the pounding started again, louder and more frantic this time. I ran back to the couch, curling my legs up in fear. "Did you hear that?" I asked her. My sister told me to stay calm and promised to try and contact my partner herself. I sat frozen on the couch, too afraid to move. My sister stayed on the phone, trying to reassure me. Eventually, I heard the sound of a truck coming up the hill. It was my partner. The moment he walked through the door, I didn't even let him settle. I yelled, "Take that bed out of here." He didn't argue. He immediately tossed the frames off the deck, letting them crash onto the lawn below. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I heard him loading the bed frames into his truck to take them to the dump. As he worked, a strange guttural growl filled the air. It was loud, almost like it had come out of me, followed by a swooshing sound. I felt sick all over again. "I'm telling you," I said to him, "that bed was haunted. It was evil. Never bring something like that into this house again." The bed frame had strange numbers written on the back of its panels, something I didn't notice until it was too late. After the bed was gone, I had my house blessed, every corner cleansed, and I haven't felt that malevolent presence since. Interestingly, my friend who gave me the bed stopped collecting antiques after I warned her. She told me her mother, who had passed away after a long illness, had asked for me before she died. A strange thing, as I barely knew her mother. I couldn't make sense of the connection, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never bring another antique bed into my home again. I'll never forget. Another eerie encounter happened to a classmate of mine. She worked as a laboratory assistant in one of the university's computer labs. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and she was alone wiping down computer monitors. As she worked, something in the reflection caught her eye. A woman stood behind her. She wore a polka dot dress, something old-fashioned, like from another time. My classmate frowned, confused. She hadn't heard anyone come in, and why would someone wear such an outdated outfit? Then, realization struck her like ice water. She had locked the door before starting her work. A shiver ran down her spine. Slowly, she turned around, dreading what she might see, but the lab was empty. Her pulse pounded as she faced the monitor again. The woman was still there. Panic surged through her. She dropped the cloth, bolted for the door, and ran down the hallway, tears streaming down her face. When she finally reached her colleagues, she stammered out the story, barely able to catch her breath. She wasn't the only one to witness something unusual in that building. We moved into our 80-year-old house just over 5 years ago. At the time, our youngest son was only 2. Almost immediately, he refused to go into the bathroom alone, saying he saw black eyes in there. We brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to avoid potty training or letting his imagination run wild. But soon, other things began to happen, small, unsettling things. It started with items disappearing. Hairbrushes, keys, cups of coffee, all things we just put down would vanish, only to reappear in entirely different places. At first, we laughed it off, but there was something else, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Sometimes, while working at my computer, I'd feel a tap on my shoulder, but no one would be there. My kids would often ask, "What?" thinking I had called them, but I hadn't said a word. The strange occurrences became harder to ignore. One afternoon, my son and I were in the kitchen, chatting while I did the dishes. Suddenly, from across the room, a box of cereal flew off the top of the refrigerator, hit the window over the sink, and fell into the sink with a loud crash. We both froze, staring at each other in complete silence. Then I started seeing it. A large, dark figure moving through the house. It would emerge from the bathroom, cross the hallway, and disappear into the wall, only to reappear moments later. At first, I didn't say anything, but then my husband, who didn't believe in spirits, admitted he saw it too. The kids started describing a similar figure, a tall, black shadow wandering through the house. We had never told them what we had seen. One night, a friend came over, and we decided to watch a ghost cam online. The lights were off in the computer room, and all the kids were gathered around us, peering at the screen. Out of nowhere, the lights turned on. Assuming one of the kids had flipped the switch, I said, "Hey, turn them back off." Instantly, the lights went off. My friend mentioned she actually liked having the lights on, and, as if in response, the lights came back on. "Who did that?" one of the kids asked nervously. We turned around to see every single child standing there with us, nowhere near the light switch. "Well, I want the lights off," I said firmly, and, as if on cue, they turned off again. Another night, I was in bed watching TV. My husband was at work. 2 of my youngest boys were asleep on the sofas in the living room. My daughter was at a sleepover, and my older sons were watching TV in the living room. One of them came into my room and asked if I had heard anything. I laughed, assuming he had spooked himself watching a scary movie, but he insisted they were watching Family Guy. He came back a few minutes later, looking more frightened. This time, he begged me to come into the living room. Annoyed, I grabbed a sewing project and sat with them, figuring I'd stay until they felt comfortable enough to sleep. As I worked, they both exclaimed, "Mom, did you hear that?" I hadn't. The sewing machine had drowned out the noise. I stopped sewing and waited, listening. At first, there was nothing. I went back to my project, but before I could start, they stopped me again. Frustrated, I began packing up my supplies when I heard it, a loud thud from upstairs. The boys asked if I heard it this time. I blamed it on the cats, but my son pointed to the 2 sleeping cats curled up on the floor. Before I could think of another explanation, the thud came again, and again. For nearly an hour, we listened to the sounds of banging thuds, and what sounded like furniture being dragged across the wooden floors above us. We tried to muster the courage to go upstairs and see what was happening, but we didn't even make it to the first step. Fear held us back. Eventually, the noises stopped, and the boys fell asleep. I stayed awake until my husband came home at 6:00 a.m. When he asked why I was up so early, I told him everything. He laughed, brushing it off, and went upstairs to check. I followed closely behind him. As he reached the top of the stairs, he froze. Peering over his shoulder, I saw why. Our oldest son's room was completely destroyed. The box springs had been removed from the beds, and the mattresses were leaning against the walls. The dresser was in the middle of the room with the TV on top of it. Toys, books, papers, and clothes were scattered everywhere. We didn't say a word to each other. We just cleaned the room in silence. Later, I spoke to a friend who suggested using white sage to cleanse the house. I started researching hauntings and decided to investigate further. Armed with a digital camera, I ventured upstairs in the dark, taking pictures wherever I felt a chill or an unsettling presence. When I came downstairs, I decided to take a picture of the fireplace. There was something about it that had always felt off to me, but I couldn't quite explain why. As I reviewed the image on the LED screen of my digital camera, I didn't see anything unusual. Still, I uploaded the photos to my computer. That's when I saw it. There were orbs everywhere. In one section of the upstairs hallway, the orbs were so dense it looked like a galaxy. At the bottom of the stairs, a red blob stood out. But the most unsettling photo was the one of the fireplace. There, clear as day, was a bright white figure of a woman. She appeared to be wearing a bathrobe, or something similar. I didn't say anything to anyone at first. I just showed the photo to friends and family without giving them any context. Every single one of them said the same thing. It was a woman. We decided to cleanse the house. We bought white sage and burned it everywhere. Inside, outside, every corner of the property. For a time, the activity calmed down, and I finally felt like we had some control over the situation. Then I spoke with a neighbor who gave me a chilling backstory. She said that before we moved in, devil worshippers had rented our house. She and her husband had heard strange sounds coming from the property, and when the renters were evicted, the owners had to clean up the damage. The walls were covered in demonic graffiti. Her story gave me an explanation for the energy in the house, but it also made me uneasy. The peace didn't last. Within a couple of months, the disturbances started again. One night, my daughter called out for us. We ran to her room and found her new television flipping through channels on its own. I told her she must be sitting on the remote, but she pointed to her nightstand, where the remote sat untouched. I removed the batteries, but the television continued to switch channels. The next day, it was the boys' turn. They yelled for us to come upstairs, and when we did, we were shocked to find that every channel on their TV was in French. We don't have satellite, and we don't live in a French-speaking area. There was no logical explanation. We turned off the television and left the room. The strange events didn't stop there. The bathtub began running water on its own, and the toilet would flush without anyone near it. But the most disturbing incident happened in the kitchen. We were sitting in the living room when we heard the buzzing sound of the self-cleaning oven. When we went to investigate, we saw the lever on the oven door moving back and forth rapidly, while the digital control panel flickered between random numbers, letters, and symbols. We stood there in stunned silence, watching it for nearly 5 minutes. My kids looked terrified, and I felt the need to take control. I yelled, "Knock it the ***, cough." Instantly, everything stopped. The kitchen fell silent, and then the oven door fell off completely, crashing onto the floor. When I inspected the hinges, I saw that they looked as if they had been cut. Desperate to find peace, I tried talking to the spirits. I don't know why I felt compelled to, but I did. I told them they could stay if they wanted, but they needed to stop scaring my family. I encouraged them to move on, saying they would be happier if they went to the other side. As I spoke, I felt a wave of sadness come over me, so strong it made me want to cry. For the next 3 months, I battled a deep depression. There was no reason for it. My life and family were wonderful, but the sadness lingered whenever I was in the house. If we left for a weekend, I felt fine, but the moment we returned, it came back. Lately, the dark figure has reappeared. It seems to like the foyer, the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. My daughter, who doesn't believe in spirits at all, recently admitted to seeing it standing at the foot of her bed. Guests in our home often say they feel uneasy, as if they're being watched. We never tell them about our experiences, so they have no preconceived ideas. A friend of my daughter is staying with us this week. She mentioned feeling a cold spot in the living room. I sat where she pointed, and my back grew cold while the rest of my body remained warm. She also said that earlier, while taking a bath, she felt like someone was watching her. She hurried to rinse off and left the bathroom as fast as she could. For the past 4 months, I've been waking up with deep, burning scratches on my arms, legs, back, and face. The scratches are almost always in groups of 3, with the middle one being the deepest. They burn, and some have even left scars. I have no fingernails, and there's nothing in my bedding that could cause them. It's not our dog either. She sleeps in my son's room. Sometimes the dog will stop suddenly and growl at nothing. I don't know if the scratches are because I used the sage and made the spirits angry, or if it's because I'm not afraid of them. Either way, I feel like I'm being targeted. My mom wants us to move out, but I'm scared the spirits might follow us. For now, we're just dealing with it. This happened about a year after that experience, and it's just as eerie in its own way. It all started with my friend Paige's cat, Belle. Belle had been part of Paige's family for as long as I could remember, almost 13 or 14 years. She was a big cat, no matter what they did. The vet never found anything wrong until an X-ray finally revealed 3 tumors and a significant amount of fluid around her heart. It was advanced, and even if they'd caught it earlier, there wasn't much they could have done. The decision was heartbreaking, but Paige and her family decided to put Belle down. For the next 6 days, Paige made it a habit to sprinkle catnip on Belle's grave in their backyard as a way of honoring her. On the 6th night, I went over to stay with Paige, and nothing unusual happened. The next day, we stopped by an adoption center to look at kittens. After much debate, Paige decided against getting a kitten and instead adopted a 4-year-old cat named Isabel, or Izzy for short. Izzy was shy, still adjusting to being out of the pound, so we let her explore the house while we went back to Paige's room to hang out. At one point, we started talking about ghost stories and the idea of pet spirits staying behind. I mentioned Belle, and Paige suddenly remembered she hadn't sprinkled catnip on the grave that day. Crap, I forgot to do it. Oh well, she'll get over it, Paige said casually, and we moved on with our conversation. That's when things started to get weird. It was daylight outside, and all the lights in the house were on. The hallway, the sitting room by the front door, and even Paige's room. The curtains were open too, so there was plenty of light. We were sitting on her bed, talking and watching Danny Phantom on TV, while Paige got the bathroom ready for a shower. Suddenly, the TV went out. We tried turning the cable box off and back on again, and the TV came back on. We shrugged it off as a fluke, but a few minutes later, it happened again. The weather was perfect, so there was no storm or wind to blame. Starting to feel nervous, we reset the cable box again. This time, the TV stayed on for a little longer, but then it began turning off and on repeatedly. Annoyed, I finally called out, "Stop." The TV came back on and stayed that way. Just as we were settling back down, Paige walked into the room in her bathrobe to ask me something, and the TV went out again. This time, the closet light flickered and went out, followed by the light above the bed. Paige, finally catching on, shouted, "Stop it, Belle. Leave Tiffany alone." The lights and the TV immediately came back on. Paige went into the shower, leaving me alone in the room. I decided to distract myself by playing my Game Boy. That's when I saw it. A white streak passed right in front of the TV. I froze, dropping the Game Boy, and stared at the screen, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. Trying to brush it off, I picked up the Game Boy and started playing again. But then the TV went out and the lights flickered. Terrified, I jumped up and ran into the bathroom where Paige was. When Paige finished her shower, she insisted on checking the room before I came out. Once she gave the all clear, I cautiously returned. The TV went out again. This time, Paige was done. "Goodbye, Belle," she shouted. I said goodbye now. "Is that what you wanted? Well, there's a new cat here, so I won't get lonely without you. Goodbye and good luck." The TV came back on and stayed on for the rest of the night. The strangest part was that the rest of the house seemed unaffected. The hallway lights, the living room TV, everything else worked perfectly. It was only Paige's room that had gone haywire. I believe it was Belle's way of saying goodbye, letting Paige know she was still there. Not long after, another cat named Toby wandered into Paige's life, as if he owned the place. Now she has 2 cats, just like I do. There's one little detail I can't stop thinking about. The old cat's name was Belle, and the new cat is Isabel. Coincidence? Maybe, but I can't help but wonder if there's something more to it. In 1976, my grandparents and their 2 daughters moved from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia and bought a house that was around 25 years old at the time. The house, still standing today, became their home, though none of us know much about its history before they moved in. My grandmother passed away in July of 1991 after a short but difficult battle with lung cancer. She and I were incredibly close. I spent nearly every day with her. Her death left a void in my young life that nothing seemed to fill. A few years later, my parents and I moved into my grandparents' house so my grandfather could spend more time with me. He converted the downstairs into an apartment, and we lived upstairs. A year or 2 after we settled in, strange things began to happen. I was between 7 and 9 years old at the time, but the memories remain vivid. Sometimes the TV channel would change on its own, even when no one was near the remote. One Thanksgiving, my dad's friend joined us for dinner. As he sat at the table, a wine glass slid across the surface without being touched. We all froze, staring, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. My mother often caught glimpses of a white shadow moving through the hallway. It would dart quickly at first, but if she acknowledged it, the shadow would slow, as if it knew it had been noticed. One moment that I will never forget happened in November of 1997. That week, we had received terrible news. My grandfather on my dad's side had fallen gravely ill and was in the hospital. The doctors didn't hold out much hope, and my parents spent nearly all their time by his side. I was only 10 years old and couldn't stay home alone, so my mom's friend Donna came to stay with me. One night after running errands together, we came back home. Donna placed the keys on the counter near the door since we needed to leave again soon. We went about our business, and when it was time to go, the keys were gone. We searched everywhere, growing more and more baffled. Finally, we found them sitting in my room. I hadn't touched them. It wasn't something I would have done without telling Donna. A couple of nights later, after everyone had fallen asleep, Donna woke up to a noise coming from the hall. Thinking I might have gotten up for a drink of water, she called out to me. When there was no response, she assumed she had imagined it and tried to fall back asleep. But then she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Donna had experienced paranormal activity before, so she knew something was there. Forcing herself to open her eyes, she prepared for the worst. What she saw next chilled her to the bone. A spirit stood over her, staring her in the face, smiling. Frozen with fear, she closed her eyes tightly and willed herself to stay calm. When she opened them again, the spirit was gone. The following morning, my grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep. When Donna told my mom what she had experienced, my mom wasn't surprised. She assured Donna that she had felt similar presences in the house. Both of them believed it was the spirit of my grandmother, checking in on her favorite granddaughter during a difficult time. We eventually moved out of that house, but I believe my grandmother's spirit has followed us. Talking to my mom one morning, we realized that we both had felt her presence in the years since we left. My mom has seen movement out of the corner of her eye, and I have felt a familiar, comforting presence when I've been alone in the house. Even now, I believe she has found her way back to us, and in a way, we're reunited once again. Well, last night, I finally worked up the courage to confront them. It's something I've been avoiding for a while, but I decided it was time to face whatever, or whoever, they were. I spent most of the evening watching TV, trying to keep myself from backing out. By 11:00 p.m., I told myself there was no turning back. I headed into my room, ready but nervous. When I got there, something felt off. My blankets were turned down, even though I didn't remember doing it. I shrugged it off, blaming my imagination, and flopped onto my bed. The room was dark except for a faint sliver of yellow light peeking through the edges of my blinds from the porch. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. I tried to relax, but I couldn't. I kept telling myself that if they were going to show up, they'd wait until they thought I was asleep. Slowly, I forced myself to calm down, steadying my breathing and closing my eyes halfway. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted one of them. It stood to my right, next to my nightstand. I recognized it immediately. It was the same one that always made the others leave me alone. My heart raced as I tried not to panic. Instead, I focused on finding my inner peace, the mental space I go to when I feel scared. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there staring at me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel its gaze fixed directly on my face. I sighed and turned onto my side, pretending to shift in my sleep so I could get a better look. The shadow was tall and solid. I couldn't see through it, but that's all I could make out. Staring at it through a half-open eye, I asked loudly in my head, "Who are you and what do you want?" The shadow disappeared. I sat up, furious. After all the time it had taken me to work up the nerve to confront them, it just vanished. My frustration boiled over, and I said out loud, "What are you afraid of?" "Me? Coward." I regretted it the moment the words left my mouth. Provoking whatever it was probably wasn't the smartest idea. I should mention that I usually leave my door open about an inch so my cat can wander in and out. But that night, I had closed it. Suddenly, the door handle turned, and the door swung open. I expected my mom or brother to be there, telling me to keep it down, but no one was there. I stared out into the dark dining room and thought I saw several shadows move quickly past the doorway. My eyes darted to the VCR clock. It was 2 a.m. Then it happened, the scariest moment of the night. My stereo, which sits on a shelf opposite my bed, turned on by itself. The room exploded with the deafening sound of The Quiet Place by In Flames, one of the heaviest songs by the heavy metal band. The strange thing, the remote was sitting on top of the stereo, untouched, and the CD with that song wasn't even in the stereo. I'd taken it out earlier that day after exercising and put it back in its case. The music was so loud that the entire house heard it. My mom stormed into my room just as I was scrambling out of bed, hands over my ears, to shut it off. I managed to turn it off just as she started yelling at me. "If you can't sleep and need your music, at least keep the door closed and the volume down," she said, clearly annoyed. After she left, I sat on my bed with the light on, wide awake. I couldn't fall asleep until 6 in the morning. The most upsetting part of the whole night, the shadow didn't answer my questions. This happened in 1985 at City Hall in Ponce, known as Casa Alcaldia. My friend and I were attending an art exhibit there. That's when I saw him, a monk. He wore a long brown habit tied at the waist with a thick, rope-like belt. A wooden cross hung from his neck, and the top of his head was shaved in a style I had only seen in books. At first, I thought he was part of the exhibit or perhaps a participant in some historical reenactment. I stared, watching him from behind as he moved slowly through the gallery. I asked my friend if she saw the monk. She gave me a puzzled look and said no. Determined to prove I wasn't imagining things, I told her to follow me. I followed the monk, trying to catch a glimpse of his face, but I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, it was like he was always just out of reach. I could see the back of his head and even his ears, but his face remained hidden. He seemed to be examining the paintings, moving deliberately, almost gliding. Then he began walking toward the staircase at the left side of the hall. I figured the second floor must be open to the public, so I followed, curious about this mysterious figure. But when I reached the staircase, I stopped in my tracks. The gate to the second floor was closed, locked, and the floor above was completely dark. No one could have gone up there. "What's wrong with you?" my friend asked, confused. I shook my head, unsure how to explain what I had seen. "Forget it," I muttered. I thought I saw a monk, but deep down I knew I had seen him. 2 years later, I was called to work at the City Hall Tourist Department, located on the first floor of the same building. One day, our supervisor asked us to research interesting points in town. I asked him about the history of the building, curious if it might shed light on my experience. He told me that the building had once been a Jesuit church and that a cemetery had been located nearby. Intrigued, I asked if he had ever heard of anything strange happening there. To my surprise, he shared a story of his own. One night, while working late to find information about Ponce's carnival, he saw a tall man wearing a black cape and hood. The figure approached him silently and reached out to touch his hand. He said the touch was icy cold, and as suddenly as the figure appeared, it vanished into thin air. One day, while working with a colleague, I had to go to the second floor above the office to search for some costumes. I unlocked the gate and placed the lock in a secure spot before we began looking through the storage area. The place had an unsettling atmosphere, but we focused on our task and quickly gathered what we needed. When we finished and turned back to retrieve the lock, it was gone. We searched everywhere, growing more uneasy with each passing moment. Finally, we found the lock, sitting on the seat of a chair, far from where I had left it. Terrified, we hurried out of there. I felt physically ill from the fright and vowed never to go up there again. Later, I learned more about the building's haunted history. People have reported seeing apparitions of monks, slaves, and other shadowy figures roaming the premises. It all made sense. My encounter with the monk wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was just one of many unexplained occurrences tied to Casa Alcaldia. Even now, the thought of that place sends shivers down my spine. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It's March 17, 2007. A Saturday I won't forget. I feel like I just came back from a trip to Disneyland. Not the happy one filled with roller coasters and fireworks, though. This was more like the Disneyland of the macabre. There was so much to see, so much to experience, and the cherry on top. The art studio we visited is truly haunted. That night, I joined HPI, Haunted and Paranormal Investigations, of Northern California for an investigation. We started with a quick briefing at Starbucks, where I downed a venti caramel macchiato for courage. By 8:45 p.m., everyone had gathered. Shannon McCabe, our lead investigator and president, Tim Hawkins, Michelle Stump, Brian Colbert, Kristen Sheely, our researcher, Mary Casciano, Alicia Perry, Tech Supervisor John Wachter, Michelle Pakel, Julie English, and of course myself, the ghostwriter. After the briefing, we convoyed to the art studio. The resident of the studio, a sophisticated and elegant artist, greeted us warmly. She shared her stories about the place, which she described as being steeped in history and brimming with paranormal activity. The studio, built in the 1930s, had lived many lives before becoming an artist's haven. It had once been a restaurant, a jazz club, a speakeasy during Prohibition, complete with escape routes, a brothel, and even a Japanese gambling parlor. The space was practically alive with its past. The residents' experiences were chilling. One night around 10 p.m., she saw a dark, shadowy figure of a man in one of the rooms. He stood silently, glanced at her, and then walked away. Another time, as she painted and listened to music, she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Yet when she went to check, no one was there. Guests had their own tales to tell. One claimed to have seen a 55-ish-year-old Italian man in the bathroom. Thinking it was another guest, they thought nothing of it, until they realized there was no one else in the house. Another guest, sleeping on the couch, woke to find the same man's face inches from theirs. The resident also spoke of objects flying off walls in the kitchen, a plant moving on its own, and mysterious hot spots in various parts of the studio. One guest even dreamed of 13 entities surrounding him while he lay on the couch. The studio itself was like stepping into a surreal museum. It was an eclectic mix of Catholic and Buddhist religious icons, rebellious punk rock touches, and an array of haunting artwork, decrepit dolls, voodoo-like figures, skulls, disco balls, old photographs, and Gothic trinkets. It felt as if every piece of art had a story, and the studio itself was one giant, eerie masterpiece. As the investigators roamed the studio with their equipment, video cameras, EVP monitors, EMF meters, and temperature gauges, they captured orbs everywhere. The orbs flitted about inside and even outside the studio, adding to the mystique of the place. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the content, give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A guest and his girlfriend led a few of us to the cellar, a space as treacherous as it was fascinating. We found relics like a cat's skull, tax forms from 1942, old bottles, and broken furniture. The resident mentioned discovering mummified feral cats there in the past. My most memorable find: a black widow spider that convinced me it was time to leave the cellar. Back in the living room, the activity ramped up. One investigator's EMF meter went wild, followed by another's. Two of our team members felt a presence behind them, an ominous, heavy sensation. Our video cameras captured an orb floating to one investigator, settling at her torso, and then dissipating. Moments later, she jumped in fright after hearing rustling sounds nearby. Could it have been the Italian ghost the resident affectionately calls Tony? By midnight, we packed up our equipment and prepared to head home. Investigations like this bring a sense of camaraderie to the team. Sharing such extraordinary and unexplainable experiences creates a bond that feels like family. As I drove home, I turned on some music to clear my head. First came Sail Away, lifting my spirits, but when the theme from The Exorcist started playing, I yanked out the CD immediately. I didn't need that kind of energy to follow me home. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Larry and I have a daughter named Nadine. My husband, Ian, and I have been married for 3 years now, and we recently bought a farm, our dream home. We were excited to start this new chapter of our lives. The farm came with 4 horses, 2 ponies, 11 cows, 10 chickens, and a whole bunch of cats, even some strays. It was a big change, but we were ready for it. Nadine started taking riding lessons from me, and Ian would feed the chickens every day. His friend Timmy would come over, and the two of them would take care of half the farm work. So far, everything seemed perfect. But then, the nights started to change things. In the first few weeks, Nadine would sleep with Ian and me in our bedroom. I asked her why she didn't sleep in her room, and she simply responded, "A lady, Mommy." I was taken aback. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Nadine, who was only 5, looked at me seriously and said, "She goes and rides the horses." I felt stunned, but before I could say anything, she added, "She is a ghost." I was speechless. I had never heard her say anything like this before, and honestly, I couldn't imagine where it came from. I had never mentioned ghosts to her, nor had anyone else. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she had a vivid imagination. But that same night, I decided to stay up with her and watch TV in the living room. That's when it all began. We were sitting there when we suddenly heard a loud noise. It sounded like my training horse for Nadine, Kissy, was making a commotion, and it sounded very close, though the barn was down the field from the house. Nadine immediately ran to the window, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. I followed her, and we both saw Kizzy running at full speed across the field. But then something happened that made my heart skip a beat. Nadine shouted, "The lady." I froze in place as we saw something that I'll never forget. Kissy ran past the window again, but this time there was something, or rather, someone, on her back. It was a ghostly figure, pale and almost transparent, riding Kissy as she galloped by. I couldn't move. I ran to wake Ian up, shaking with fear. We went down to the barn that night to check on Kissy, and sure enough, she was safely inside, where we had put her. But the strange part was that every night after that, we would see the ghost in our house. It started small, just a touch when we were sleeping, something that felt like a hand on your shoulder or by your bedside. But when you would wake up, the figure would be standing there, just out of reach, staring at you. The thing is, our house was newly built. There were no stories of ghosts or spirits in the area. So was this really a ghost, or was it all just a dream? Sometimes I wondered if it was all in my head, but the touch, the coldness, and the feeling of being watched was too real to ignore. It continued for weeks. Every night the ghost would appear. Sometimes it was near the barn, sometimes by our bedroom window, and sometimes right next to us in the middle of the night. We couldn't explain it. I still can't. I run a home daycare, and one afternoon, something happened that I'll never forget. It was after lunch, and I was in the living room with the kids when one of my daycare children, a 4-year-old, ran out of our hall bathroom. She looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "There's a ghost in the hall. It's a little girl." She told me that the little girl had been chasing her, but she had run away, and the little girl had given up. My heart skipped a beat. I asked for more questions, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Then she ran into the playroom and told me, "There's a man out there." I was the only one in the house at the time, so I asked her what the man's name was. Without hesitation, she told me, "His name is Martin." I was taken aback. You see, sometime in the 80s, a man named Martin had passed away in this house. I had never mentioned Mr. Martin to the children, so there was no way she could have known about him. It sent a chill down my spine. Then the little girl said something even stranger. She told me, "There's a lady ghost with him, and they're about to kiss." The next year, something even stranger happened. The same little girl, playing with another child in the room, suddenly stopped and looked around as if someone else was there with her. But there was no one else in the room. My 18-year-old daughter has had her own experiences. She's walked through the living room several times and seen a black fog floating near the spot where Mr. Martin passed away. She's also seen someone standing in the hallway by the bathroom. One night she even called out to me, thinking someone was standing at the end of the hall, but when she checked, no one was there. It's not just the kids either. My dog, who's usually calm, will sometimes stand in the doorway of my bedroom and bark into the hallway for no reason. It's as if something is standing there, just out of sight. My 16-year-old son had an experience one night too. He was sitting at the computer, late and alone in the room, when he saw a shadow move out of the corner of his eye. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. He was the only one in the room. There have been so many strange occurrences in this house that it's hard to ignore. One night, I was alone in the house watching an OU Sooners football game on TV when someone, changed the channel. The remote was nowhere near me, and I was the only one in the house. I don't know what's happening in this house, but the odd things keep happening, and I can't help but wonder if Mr. Martin and the others are still here, watching, lingering just beyond the edge of the normal world. One of my best friends rented an old, large two-story house with wooden floors, a grand staircase at the front entrance, and a smaller one at the back. Around 6 of us lived there, and we often threw parties in the house. It was always full of laughter, music, and noise. But one night, something happened that none of us could explain. It started when a few of the girls were standing outside the back of the house, looking up at the windows. They started getting uneasy and said they didn't want to go in. They were visibly scared, which was unusual. I tried to brush it off, saying, "It's a big house, but there's nothing bad in there." I had never felt any bad energy or strange presence myself, so I thought it was just their imagination. We partied that night, like we always did, and eventually, I went to bed. But what happened next was something I could never forget. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling a heavy pressure on my chest. When I looked around, my friends were all still asleep. But there, above me, was a black shadow. I couldn't make out any details at first, just the outline of something dark hovering over me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body felt paralyzed. Then I saw a shadowy face in front of me, hovering in the air. It had no features, just darkness. My ears started ringing, and I heard a buzzing sound that grew louder and louder, like a swarm of bees. I could see the shadow clearly now, pressing down on me. I tried to speak, to shout, but my mouth wouldn't move. I whispered, "Get off my chest," almost to myself, but somehow the words felt real. To my relief, the pressure lifted, and the shadow floated towards the door. It passed right through it and was gone. Shaking, I got out of bed and walked to my friend's room. I woke him up, telling him in a daze, "You won't believe what just happened." His response chilled me to the core. He looked at me with a kind of knowing, as if he wasn't surprised at all. "You saw the ghost. It watches me every night." My heart dropped. I was stunned. The night before, we had all been partying, surrounded by friends. I had never heard him mention a ghost before, especially not something that had been watching him for so long. He didn't ask me what happened, didn't even seem shocked. He just said it like it was something he had come to expect. "It stands by the door and watches me," he said, his voice low. My jaw went slack. I could barely process what he was telling me. He had known about the ghost this entire time. And why had he never told me? After that night, things felt different. I would often hear marbles rolling on the ceiling and strange creaking noises throughout the house, like someone was walking around in the rooms upstairs when no one was there. It always seemed to happen at night, just after we would all settle down. But despite all the strange noises, nothing ever happened again like that night. The presence never seemed as intense again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there watching. I'm kind of freaked out right now. I've been reading a story here about someone who was paralyzed by a ghost, unable to wake up, feeling as if they were being held down, forbidden from moving. I never thought much about it before, but as I've been reading more about ghosts, demons, angels, and the like, something hit me. I've been experiencing these odd nights where I wake up, my eyes wide open, but I can't move. I can't speak. It's like my body is frozen, and I'm trapped in it. I remember fighting it, struggling to regain control, willing my body to move, to wake up. The most I've ever been able to control are my fingers, but even then, It's like something's pulling me back, forcing me into sleep. It's exhausting, trying so hard to break free. Sometimes, I would manage to get a small amount of control, enough to wake myself up and shake off the paralysis, but most nights, I just fall back asleep, defeated. I tried to speak, but the best I could do was move my lips just enough to make small sounds. But words? No, there's something holding me back, something that won't let me fully wake. These episodes only ever happen at night. It's like some invisible force is trapping me, holding me down in the dark hours when I'm most vulnerable. I also remember something from years ago when I was younger, sitting on the kitchen counter by the phone. My parents would go out for dinner, and I'd be home alone, trying to hide the worry in my voice when I called them. I would ask when they'd be home, but my mind was always preoccupied with the strange sounds around me, the cracks, the creaks of the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't just the sounds, though. There was a persistent sense of something, or someone, being there with me. I never really spoke about it to anyone, but I always thought there might be a ghost in that house. It never quite felt like my own space, and I think I might have been right. Recently, I've had more unsettling experiences. I woke up in the middle of the night and glanced over my shoulder. Next to the chinchilla's cage, I saw it, a shadow. It was just standing there, unmoving, watching me. My heart pounded, but I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that I was just too tired, that it was a mix of dreams and sleep deprivation. But I couldn't ignore the rush of fear that hit me in that moment. I quickly fell back asleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. This wasn't the first time I thought I saw something, some ghost or some shadowy figure, but I've always dismissed it. I've always told myself it was nothing, but now I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I need help. I want to purify my house, to rid it of whatever this presence is, to banish these invaders for good. I wear a cross every day. I love God, but right now I'm terrified. Please, I'm asking for help. Please, people who are more knowledgeable than I am, help me. Bestow upon me the strength and wisdom to get rid of these demons and send them back to the fiery depths of hell where they belong. I need to feel safe again. My school has a fascinating and unsettling history. Before it was built, the lot where our school now sits was home to a psychiatric hospital. And even before that, it was the site of a tuberculosis hospital. The school itself is divided into 6 buildings, each with its own dark history. The library, which used to be a church, the admin building, where the morgue once stood, the high school building, which was where they kept the lockdown patients in the psychiatric hospital, the middle school, which used to be the cafeteria, the art building, which was where staff went to take breaks, and the drama department, which was the sunroom of the old tuberculosis hospital. With such a history, it's no surprise that the school grounds are filled with strange stories. There isn't a single person in or around the school who hasn't seen, heard, or felt something unexplainable. On the first day of school, back in August, one of my teachers mentioned something odd about the property. He said that when the school bought the lot, they had to demolish the 7th building, what is now the baseball field, because the doors kept locking by themselves, the power wouldn't work, and people kept feeling ill for no reason. He also told us that in the admin building, all the phones would ring at once for a few seconds and then stop, like they were being used by someone unseen. At the time, I just shrugged it off, thinking the teachers were just messing with us. But then, a few months ago, something happened that made me question everything. I was sitting at the This story happened to my mom back in the 1960s, when she was still living in a big house with her brothers and sisters. They had inherited the house from my grandfather, who was a doctor. It was a large house, big enough for cousins to stay over without any trouble. The house was situated near a river, with a wooden bridge crossing it, and you'll understand why that bridge is important later in the story. The story begins one night after my mom and her siblings had returned home late from a party. Parties back then were a big deal. Being invited to one meant you were popular. They were all exhausted and decided to call it a night and head to their rooms. My mom shared a room with two of her sisters. Her bed was positioned next to a large wooden window, one of those old-fashioned ones that could open in the middle, with shutters that slid from side to side. That night, after the party, my mom woke up, feeling the urge to go to the bathroom. After she went, she climbed back into bed, hoping to fall back asleep. But as she lay there, she felt an odd sensation, like someone was watching her. She opened her eyes, and that's when she saw her. A woman with long black hair was standing outside their window, dressed in black, with eyes that were a deep, unnatural red. The woman was grinning at her, a creepy, chilling grin that made my mom's blood run cold. What made it even worse was that my mom's room was on the second floor. This woman wasn't standing on the ground. She was floating. My mom tried to call out to her sisters, but they didn't hear her. She felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. Terrified, she pulled the covers over her head, hoping that if she couldn't see the woman, maybe she'd go away. But when she finally dared to peek out from under her quilt, the woman was still there, her eyes locked on my mom, still grinning. My mom stayed hidden under the quilt, her heart racing, eventually falling asleep from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, everyone gathered downstairs for breakfast. My mom, still shaken by what had happened, didn't say anything. She figured they'd just think she was dreaming or imagining things. But then her cousin, a boy who was staying in a room on the first floor, came into the kitchen looking as if he hadn't slept all night. He was visibly shaken and, without a word, started freaking out, saying he had seen a woman outside his window. He described the woman in the exact same way my mom had seen her. Long black hair, red eyes, and that creepy grin. My mom's heart skipped a beat. It was the same woman. She finally spoke up, telling them what had happened to her the night before. Some of them were skeptical, dismissing it as coincidence, but my mom knew what she had seen. A few days later, my mom was about to enter the house when she noticed a commotion near the wooden bridge by the river. There were a lot of people gathered around, and police officers were present too. When she approached her cousin, the same one who had seen the woman the night before, ran over to her, looking pale and frantic. He told her that someone had found a sack by the bridge with the body of a dead girl inside. The police were investigating, and there was a lot of talk about it. Later, when my mom saw the news, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The news broadcast showed a picture of the dead girl, the same woman my mom and cousin had seen outside the window. The truth hit them like a ton of bricks. The woman wasn't just a ghost. She had been a real person, and now she was gone. Now, everyone believed my mom and her cousin, but it didn't make the events any less terrifying. The woman they had seen was the same girl found dead by the river, and after that, things around the house were never quite the same again.